To all those who sat in the waiting room for 10 minutes and joined early, special shout out to you. You're amazing. But we're going to go ahead and get going. So for those who might have joined and wanted an overview, forgotten why they joined, whatever it may be, this event is really oriented towards job seekers. So what we want to do is give you, a career coach's perspective on the resume, some job seeker tips, but also give you the insight from a couple of different recruiters who recruit for different things, which I think is really interesting. And we'll get into that a little later, but they can provide different perspectives and they'll really give you the idea of the recruiter's point of view. So you'll get an idea of the resume, the recruiter's point of view, and then finally, Kevin Woods is going to talk a little bit about breaking into cybersecurity specifically. And I know a lot of folks are here and really interested in getting into the industry, and GuidePoint has great opportunities, and Kevin also has some really good insights on getting into the industry. He actually started at GuidePoint and then kind of moved all the way up, so he can give a great insight on kind of the journey he's gone through. But to give a little bit before we kick in to Lori's portion and we get some people that you came here to listen to talking, I want to give you a little bit of an overview about Boots to Books, which is the organization that's putting this event on. So Boots to Books is a variety of things, including these live events. We also have some really exciting things coming up. So we've got a scholarship coming up that'll cover your certification up to $1,000. And so whether you're looking at doing Lean Six Sigma, Agile Leader, Excel in financial modeling, getting a PMP, CompTIA, whatever it may be, we'll cover the entire cost of it. So make sure to follow Boots to Books on LinkedIn. I'm sure Tom's going to drop that in the chat at some point. Cue Tom, imagine. Okay, maybe not. But he's going to drop it in the chat at some point. Make sure to follow. And so that's coming soon. We also have a variety of other live events, chances to get hired, and really exciting things coming. So make sure to follow. And then, amazing, Tom. And then also, we've got a really good resource that we just dropped that we're going to put this recording in as well. And that's the Boots to Books Masterclass. And so what that is a video course that breaks down all of the really difficult topics you face in transition into bite-sized videos that are taught by relevant experts. So everything from the job search to starting a business to which certification is right for you is all covered there. And so, for instance, the targeting a resume bullet video is taught by the great Lori Norris. And there's so many other great people in there. It's totally free. And so that link will be shared in the chat as well. Make sure to join. But without further ado, I really want to let Lori kick it off. And so once again, we're going to start with Lori, and we're going to move into the recruiter portion, and then we'll end with the great Kevin. So Lori, if you want to go ahead, give a little introduction, and then share a little bit about why you're here.
Okay, thanks, Peter. I appreciate you inviting me to come and talk. When Peter reached out and said, hey, will you come on and give a little talk about job search skills and the resume portion? Just to give you a quick overview, my name is Lori Norris. I have been in this industry since 2005, supporting veterans and transitioning service members in marketing themselves for their next career. I am the host of the Lessons Learned for Vets podcast, and I'm a contributor to the Boots to Books masterclass that they have out there, and have really just been here on a mission to educate veterans in the job search marketing process. So that's what we're going to talk about. And yes, I am going to talk about the resume. I'll even give you some actionable tips to help you go through each section of your resume and make it even more effective. But I really want to start by just changing the way that you think about the resume and the job search process. And, in its simplest form, the job search is a sales and marketing process, and you are the product that you're selling. And so we're going to talk more about that today. So I want to start off by just maybe clearing up some myths and misconceptions, but also if you have questions, I believe they can put questions in the chat, right, Peter?
Yeah, so if you guys have questions, Tom just shared a message in the chat. He can shoot it in again. Just shoot them over to Tom, and he's going to make sure they get asked.
Okay, perfect.
Rest. We'll make sure we kind of order them.
Okay. So yeah, please ask me any questions as we go along in the comments. I'll try to get to them. Otherwise, I will come back and seek you out on LinkedIn and try to answer that question. So I think Tom also put my contact information, so please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I try to share information at least once a week for that process of resume writing. I've got some articles on my LinkedIn as well. So the first thing I want you to think about is that, I know that the resume is oftentimes what stresses everybody out the most, but and it's what they feel like they have to do first, right? But I'm going to tell you, it is not the most important thing that you need to do and think about in your transition. It's not even the first thing you need to do in your transition. You really need to figure out your focus. And I know you're here today to listen in about, entering the cybersecurity world. And so, but cybersecurity is very diverse and vast. There are a lot of different directions you can go. So using events like this where you can get to know some people that are in the career field and figure out which direction you want to go. Do you want to go compliance? Do you want to go, I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but there are so many different directions you can go. So knowing that focus of where you want to go is going to help guide everything you do. What goes on your resume? What skills and accomplishments do you highlight? Who do you connect with on LinkedIn? How do you prepare your interview answers? So that's really the most important thing. So we are going to talk a little bit about focus later, but focus is a word I say a lot because the focus of your resume determines whether or not it connects with your customer. So we'll talk more about that. And, the resume is important, but if you put all of your efforts on just the resume and you don't practice interviewing, you don't have a LinkedIn presence, you don't network, you're going to have less success in your job search. So yes, your resume is, I've heard it called your ticket to the dance, but you need to have people to dance with when you get there, and you need to know which dance you want to go to. And so it's really important that yes, your resume is dialed in, but know that there are so many other factors. If only great resumes got jobs, we would have a very high unemployment rate because there are a lot of bad resumes out there, and those bad resumes get people in the door. But so that being said, a well-written, translated, focused resume is going to expedite your job search. So let's talk a little bit about that. If you've been to the transition assistance program, no matter what branch of the service you're in and what your branch calls it, in that transition program, they likely asked you to create a master resume. Oh, I wish I could throw that concept out, because your master resume is really just a storage area for information. So it's a place where you can house everything you've ever done. But in terms of your job search, your master resume is useless. All right. So think of that as where you're housing everything, but instead, I want you to think of your resume as a strategic marketing document. And as I said, you are the product. So if you think about the best marketing campaigns, they don't focus on the product. So your resume shouldn't necessarily focus on you, but it focuses on the value that that product gives to the customer. And you need to do the same thing. So how can you add value to an organization? Now, there are probably many of you listening today that want to break into cybersecurity, but haven't been in the cyber career field. Maybe you're a maintainer, maybe you're in logistics. So how can we show that you are someone who can add value to the organization? So that's really what you have to think about. If you think about, like, to say Coca-Cola as an example, when they market you Coca-Cola, they don't say, hey, drink this brown fizzy drink full of sugar. They market the fun that you have when you drink it. They market the friendships that you're gathering around with the Coca-Cola in your hand, right? So think about that in terms of, like, the resume is not about you, right? The job seeker. You need to focus on what skills, what experience, and what needs you're going to meet for the employer. How are you going to be a return on their investment, right? What makes you cost effective? So I want you to think about why companies hire, because they have a need to fulfill or a problem to solve. So if you can like just go through and say, like, you may have heard of a SWOT analysis, right? So SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Conduct that SWOT analysis to figure out, like, what do they do well? What are they missing? Who is their competition, right? So what opportunities for growth do they have in the future? And you really think about, how can you help them make that happen? That's what makes you cost effective. Really, you want to demonstrate in your resume, how are you going to earn the salary that they're going to pay you? Okay. And then once you know that, your resume is just a demonstration of proof of that value. So it's really important that when somebody reads your resume, from the very first line, they should know what your target is. What are you targeting with that resume? You know, a lot of times they're like, well, I'm just going to put everything in there and see what sticks, right? And so, you know, we're going to talk about why that's ineffective in a bit, right? So, but it's important that they know exactly what you're looking for, and they know exactly how you can add value. So there is no such thing as an effective generic resume. When you write a resume that tries to appeal to everyone, guess who you appeal to? No one, right? And so if you think about this, all right, I use fishing metaphors. So I want you to think about, if you go fishing in the Pacific Ocean, right? If you head out, right? Peter's in the Orange County area, he's right near the Pacific Ocean. It's kind of a big place, right? And so there's a lot of fish in there, but if you go out into the ocean and you don't know what kind of fish you're catching, what kind of tackle do you bring? Do you bring tackle that's on the surface or tackle that goes to the bottom? Do you bring tackle that can catch a 10-pound fish or a 250-pound fish? What kind of bait does this fish like? Is it live bait or is it, you know, dead squid? So you've got to know where that fish swims. Some fish only swim in the warm ocean waters and, you know, near kelp patties. Some are on the bottom. And so if I go out and I go fishing, I have no idea what I'm fishing for, I'm going to come back sunburned and frustrated and hungry. And I'm going to say, there are no fish in that ocean. And if you're out there job searching right now and you're putting your resume out and it's not focused and you're just kind of papering the world, right? We do in the spray and pray method. Like, you throw it out there and hope somebody bites. That's what's happening. And you're coming back and you're like, nobody's hiring. And I'm going to tell you that people are hiring. They are still hiring. It is a challenging market, but there are people hiring. Why do you think we're here today with GuidePoint Security, right? They want candidates to join them. So again, it's really important to think about, there are jobs, you're just not going about it in the most effective way, all right? So now I do want you to remember that while you getting hired is your number one priority, hiring you is likely not the company's first priority. They have a job to do, right? And though it will get easier if they bring you on board, it is important to remember they have other things going on. So don't get frustrated. Don't get discouraged if you don't hear back as quickly as you'd like. There are other things going on. Likely you're dealing with a recruiter, a hiring manager who's maybe filling other positions, or, you know, having to do extra work because they don't have the employee staff that they need. So just be patient, be persistent, but we don't want to become a pest. All right. And so I guess I want you to think about that. We want to be focused. We want to make sure we're appealing to that specific employer. And then the last, well, actually I have two last things I want to tell you about before we go into our section. So it's really important that you remember it is your job to translate your skills, to help the employer understand how you fit into their organization. So if you don't take the time to translate your military skills and terminology into understandable examples, then you are showing them that you're not willing to make the effort to speak their language, right? So have you ever been to a foreign country that doesn't speak English? Did you get off of the airplane and throw your arms wide and say, I'm here, everybody needs to speak English now because that's what I speak, right? Some would accuse us Americans of being that way, but so again, that's not how we want to do it, right? And so you have to adapt to them. You just need to change your mindset about your military skills. You might be thinking like, I am an aircraft maintainer. I don't have any relevant skills to go into cybersecurity. And I'm betting today you're going to find that you have some definite relevant transferable skills. You just have to start thinking about them and looking at them in a different way. Okay, so we'll talk more about that today. And I'm sure that the guests today will also be discussing that with you. So, and then the last kind of myth I want to clear up is on the applicant tracking software system. So you probably heard about this evil ATS robot that's shooting down your resume. And that is not the case, right? So yes, there are applicant tracking software systems out there. And yes, you need to write your resumes so that they can be easily read by an ATS, but they're just the initial screeners of your resume. They parse information out of your resume and populate their system with information from your resume. So we need to make sure that the information can be taken out of your resume and put into their software by their ATS. So we want to avoid things like headers, text boxes, and tables. So if your resume has either one of those three things, which we'll talk more about them later, the ATS typically can't read information in those three formatting areas. And so you need to fix that, okay? But again, I also look at keyword matches, right? So when we were speaking earlier, someone had mentioned they had like 500 candidate applicants come in. That's a little bit overwhelming for a recruiter. And so what they typically use that ATS for is the ATS looks at keyword match, your percentage of keyword match. And so then they might say like, okay, I'm going to start with my people that are 80% match or greater. And then they kind of go down the ranks. And so you want to make sure using the keyword match concept that you're ranking higher. Now, most recruiters say they read every resume that comes in the door. And I think that there are many out there that do exactly that. But what they rely on the ATS to do is find the best qualified candidates. So no, an ATS isn't shooting down your resume like some evil robot, but it is, you want to make sure that you're working with the ATS to get ranked as highly as possible, okay? I just want to pause and see if we've had any questions that I need to address. I don't see any over there, but let's see. Yep, I don't see anything in there, so let's keep going. So I'm going to go section by section and just kind of talk through some of the key areas in the resume. So I'm going to start with contact information right at the top of your resume. Seems pretty straightforward, but there's a couple of things I really want you to think about. First and foremost, I don't want you to put your contact info in a header. So what that means is if you have to double click to edit your phone number, your email, your address, your any of that, your LinkedIn URL, your name, if you have to double click to edit it, it's in a header. And ATS can't read information in headers. I helped a customer write his resume and he was applying to jobs and he came to me and he said, I'm not getting phone calls and I don't understand why. And I said, show me what you're applying for. And I compared what he was applying for to his resume and there was no reason he shouldn't be getting calls. And as we started talking about it, he's like, oh yeah, I reformatted my resume and I put my contact info in a header. And I had like one of those like Home Alone moments where I'm like, no, that's why you've missed out on all these opportunities, because when your contact information is in a header, off in many of these systems, you will go in there with no name, no phone number, no email. They don't know how to find you. And so are they going to take the time to go back and figure it out when they have 500 of the people to look at? Probably not. And I'm going to tell you, I was like, okay, here's a new version with your contact info, not in a header. And within a week, he had an interview. So it's amazing. Like, he wasted like 8 months before he reached out to me and said, why am I not getting phone calls? So don't do that. Don't put your information in a header. Okay. Your address is not necessary on a resume. You can put a city and state, but if you're open to relocation and you're pretty mobile, you don't have to put that city state even on there. One thing you can do is, let's say you're serving today in Alaska and you plan to move to Alabama. You can put Huntsville, Alabama as your city and state. And then when they call you for an interview, you can just say, I'm currently completing my service commitment in Alaska, but I will be relocating to Alabama when my service commitment is complete in October of this year. So that's a way of dealing with that. Make sure your phone number is on there, that you check it, that it has the right number of digits and that it's not transposed. Make sure that you have a professional voicemail. Put your LinkedIn URL there. Customize it. If you don't know how to customize your LinkedIn URL to get rid of all those numbers and letters after your URL, just Google it. It's really easy. And then put a professional email address, not like hotmama66@yahoo.com. That's mine. No, right? No, so I'm just kidding. I did really see one once that said, I love Jack Daniels at Yahoo. And I was like, you can't put this. And the lady was like, but my husband's name is Jack and our last name is Daniels. And I'm like, yeah, most people aren't going to understand that. So you need to change that, right? So make sure that you check it as well. Okay. Now let's get into the summary. So we're finished with the contact info. Let's move into the summary. So I said it earlier, you want to clearly state your target from the first line of your resume, and your summary and your headline is where you tell them that. We don't write an objective anymore, but we're going to put a headline right at the top that says, this is what I'm targeting. And then your first line tells them, how many years of experience do you have? What makes you qualified for it? What certifications do you have? What's the scope of your experience? You don't need to start off with United States Army veteran. They're going to figure out you're a veteran when they read your experience. So remember, your resume is about where you're going, not where you've been. So write your summary about where you want to go. Okay. Your summary should be very brief. No more than 5 to 7 lines. Should be just a short recap of your highlights and why you're qualified. Okay. It's a good place to throw in things like security clearance or software skills if they're relevant. Okay. Let's move on to our work experience section. So this is where we really start talking about our value. Again, we're not talking about what we did every day in our job, but instead we're going to focus on what we accomplished. And so many of you struggle with this section specifically for a couple of reasons, but I'm guessing a couple of you struggle because you're not comfortable bragging about yourself, right? You talk a lot about the we of your service and not about the I. Here's what I did, right? So it's really important to start thinking about, what value did you add, right? How did you make a difference? And so if I were bragging, I would tell you that I was the best there ever was, right? But when I'm stating a fact, I'm going to say I'm good at what I do because of X, Y, and Z. right? And I can prove why I'm good at something because of X, Y, and Z, because I could tell you stories. I could give you examples. I could give you references. If I say there that I was the best there ever was, unless I have proof of that, that's just being braggadocious, right? But if I'm stating the facts of what make me good at my job, that's what I want from you. I really want you to think about that. Why are you worth the money that they're going to pay you? What is your unique value, right? So do you know the difference between arrogance and confidence? It's very subtle, but the arrogant person believes they are the smartest person in the room, where a confident person believes they are one of the smart people in the room. The arrogant person puts themselves above or better than. And so I want you to be the confident person that goes in there and knows your value, knows your worth, and knows why you're going to be of positive impact to that employer, okay? So your work experience should focus on results, impact, accomplishments, not your everyday tasks and duties, right? So you need to have measurables, numbers. So how many people did you supervise? What's the value of the assets that you protected? The percentages of improvement. So those types of numbers really make a difference. It helps someone who has no knowledge of the military to really understand the scope of the value that you brought. So those measurables are really important, okay? So I just want to take you through a bullet that I read on someone's resume. And when I asked him about it, he said, I don't know what that means. I just took it right off of my performance report. And so his resume bullet that came right off of his military eval, it read, oversaw the purchase and replacement of hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of storage racks, increasing the 660th Air Refueling Squadron efficiency by 85%. I was like, okay, well, there's numbers in there, but I don't know what those numbers mean, right? And I did. I was like, what does that mean? And he's like, I don't know. I just took it right off my eval. And so I started asking questions. How big is the organization that you supported? Like, what exactly did you do, right? So he said, here's what I did. I took an empty warehouse and I went out and I procured storage racks and reorganized the warehouse to streamline the picking and pulling of kits that we delivered to the customer. And by doing that, we were able to cut our response time in half, from 6 hours to 2.5 to 3 hours. Okay, that's starting to make sense to me, right? So I said, well, how many times a day did you do this? And he said, 3 times a day. It was a 24/7 environment. So we said 3 hours saved times 3 times a day is 9 hours a day times 365 days a year is 13,140 hours saved annually. That's a little more tangible than an 85% efficiency increase. And it's a number that we can explain and that an employer can understand, right? So I just want you to change the way you think about things. Just because it says that on a military eval and that's what you're used to seeing, a lot of people are going to look at that and go, I don't even know what that means. And you might feel the same way. So let's see if we can explain it, translate it, right? So here's a bullet that we prepared together from that information, okay? So see if you can follow along. So it saved 13,000 plus productivity hours annually for a 300-person organization after leading a $200,000 project that reorganized production staging area and cut customer delivery time by 50%. So again, a little easier to understand, a little more tangible. That's how you translate your military skills, performance evaluation bullets to relevant, understandable accomplishments. And I always want you to ask yourself, after you write a bullet for your resume, so what? I want you to ask yourself, have I answered the so what question? So what value did that bring? So what difference did that make? So what was the impact? So what would have happened if I hadn't done it? So ask yourself those so what questions and keep writing and clarifying until you've answered all of those questions, okay? So it's important that you don't just tell us you have the skills, that you prove it to us and you tell us why you're good at it. So don't just say, I have project management experience. Tell me, I led up to 17-person cross-functional project teams and managed projects with budgets of up to $2 million with a 97% success rate of on time within budget completion. Right? So tell us things that prove that you've done that. Prove that you have the skills. It's not enough just to stuff your resume with keywords. A human, like that might get you past the computer, but a human is always going to read your resume. And so we want to appeal to the human who is looking for someone who is cost effective, who is going to bring the biggest return on investment. Okay. So let's talk about education. And I just want to leave a few minutes for questions if there are any, but I just want to respect everyone's time and wrap up here as early as possible so that we can get you to the good stuff, right? So on your education, it's really important that you still list degrees, even if they're partially completed or in progress. So maybe you're like, oh, I haven't finished my degree yet. Can I list it? The answer is yes. You're going to very clearly, in bold, it's going to say a Bachelor of Science in Information Security and Technology. That you're going to put your, not bold, your university name, and then right next to it, right there in black and white, it's going to say in progress or due 2024 or courses toward degree. It's okay to list that degree in progress. Just don't claim you have a degree that you don't have. Okay. And so it's one of the things to think about is if you have one degree and it's not in a related career field, then you still want to list that degree because it shows that you completed your degree, right? But if let's say you have 5 different bachelor's degrees and 3 different masters. I just saw this the other day. We don't want to come across as unfocused or overqualified by showing you're overeducated. So in that case, you might just want to pick the most relevant degree to you list on your resume. So I would also remove dates of education unless it explains a gap in your employment or it's important to show the relevance of your knowledge because it's current. My education was completed years and years and years before our amazing Peter Klein was even born. I'm old. Let's just say it right out loud, right? So if I put the date of my education, it wouldn't look as relevant and it would tell you that I am an old lady. So we don't want to do that. So again, I don't list dates of education unless it explains that why I have a gap because I was going to school for the last 2 years. So GPAs don't need to be listed if they're under 3.5. And honors should be spelled out. So instead of using the Latin magna cum laude, summa cum laude, just put with honors, with highest honors. So I know that was really condensed and I talked a little bit like an auctioneer at times. I hope that was some relevant, valuable information for you. I invite you to check out the videos that I've recorded for Boots to Books for their masterclass. And I talk a little slower in those, I promise, and reach out to me on LinkedIn. I welcome you to listen to the Lessons Learned for Vets podcast where I interview veterans who have already made the transition and they share where they struggled, where they stumbled, what were the keys to their success. We've got 114 episodes out there. So please check it out. You can find it on all major podcast providers, or I think that Tom put the website in the comments. So I want to open it up for any questions and see if there's anything I can answer for you.
Awesome. Yeah. So anybody who has any questions, please go ahead and send them to the email that Tom dropped in the chat. And we'll make sure that they get asked. I have one for you, Lori, but I wanted to touch on a couple of things you said that I thought were especially useful and kind of changed my perception of the resume. One is that it's like a tailored marketing document, right? It's not a just compendium of everything you've ever done.
Yes.
I think that was a big shift that I went through when I got out of the military. Is I was like, I need to list every accomplishment I've ever had, because otherwise they're not going to know about it, and then like, I'm not going to get the job, but it's not the case. It's, how are you going to be relevant in terms of their needs, and in terms of the things they've listed in that job description to tell you what they're looking for. Another thing I thought was really interesting is knowing your target. You stress that a lot. And I think that that's something that we struggle with a lot, especially making the transition from one career to another. For instance, I was an infantryman and now I do nothing of the sort. It's really, it's difficult to find that end goal. And it takes some exploration, some networking, doing some Veterati calls. But not knowing your target makes the job search almost impossible, because you're just spraying and praying. You don't really have any end goal. So I couldn't agree more. And then the last one is, you talked about how there's a lot of opportunity available. People are saying no one's hiring, or whatever it may be. So I went on LinkedIn while you were doing that and just looked up cybersecurity, and then filtered by either intern or entry level. And there were 68.7 thousand listings. That's on LinkedIn alone. So there definitely are companies hiring. And I know it's not easy to break in. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that at all. But there definitely is opportunity out there. The question I had for you, Lori, is among people, especially service members that you work with, what are kind of the big stumbling blocks on the resume? Where do you think it kind of veers off?
I think the biggest issue is that lack of focus. And it's why I talk about it so much, is they're like, I want them to know I'm a jack of all trades, right? And what follows from jack of all trades is master of none, right? So what you're trying to do is show them that I would say you're trying to show them that you're a Swiss Army knife. What they really need is a hammer. And a Swiss Army knife doesn't drive a nail very well. So we need to be the tool that they're looking for. And so, if someone says, bring me a hammer, or you're in a surgery and the doctor says, bring me a scalpel, and you bring them a Swiss Army knife, it's not going to do the trick. And so it's really important that you target and focus whenever possible. And so I think, that's the biggest thing, is like, I just want them to know everything I can do. And what you're really doing when you do this is you're basically saying to the employer, hey, can you please figure out where I fit in your organization? So you're asking them to do work to bring you on. If they have 495 other people that did that work for them already, they're probably not going to do it for you. And so you've got to be focused and targeted. And that's the biggest issue. And then I would say, like, right there, tied for a second, is just that failure to translate transferable skills. Like, I see a resume and it's all about aviation maintenance. And I'm like, okay, so what do you want to do? And they're like, I want to be in finance, or I want to be in cybersecurity. And I'm like, well, then why does this read like an aircraft maintainer? They're like, well, that's what I did. Like, okay, that makes sense. But remember, your resume needs to focus on where you're going, not where you've been. So you've got to look at where you've been and say, what have I done as an aircraft maintainer, as an infantryman like you, Peter, that is relevant to where I want to go? I'm just going to take a wild guess, Peter, and just say that I bet you use the skills you gained as an infantryman all day long, every day, with what you do. But they're different. You use them in a different way, right? And so you've got to think about, how can I reframe and repurpose the military skills that I have so that an employer sees that they're valuable and relevant.
And that makes complete sense. I think that's all we have. So amazing. Thank you so much, Lori, for coming on. Lori has been a staple at our events this year. For anyone who has not been at the past ones, Lori has been kind enough to come on before our hiring fair and at other events to help people get their resumes ready. So she's been amazing. Make sure to check out the Lessons Learned for Vets podcast. I am a big fan. She brings on people. You hear a variety of different perspectives on the transition. You can learn a lot, and you can take a little bit from each story and help it and use it to kind of guide your own, which I really like about it. And yeah, she's amazing. Tom, if you could drop Lori's LinkedIn in the chat, you guys should definitely follow and connect with Lori. And yeah, Lori, thank you so much. I guess, is there anything you want to shout out before you hop off?
I think that's it. Yeah, just like I said, check out the podcast, connect with me on LinkedIn. We also have a YouTube where we share just short video clips from the podcast as well. So just look up Lessons Learned for Vets podcast, or Lessons Learned for Vets podcast on YouTube, and you'll find our channel there as well. And just know that I'm here to help and answer any questions that I can.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Lori.
All right, thanks.
Awesome. Well, sweet. Up next, and Lori is just amazing. She has helped so many of our events. Up next, we have the recruiters from GuidePoint Security. We have Karen, Mike, and Taylor, who are kind enough to come on and join us to give us the insights from the other side of the desk, I guess, is a way to think about it. Now you're going to get a chance to really look from the recruiter side to hear their perspective on what makes a candidate attractive, what can be some pitfalls. And so I'm really excited. I really appreciate each of you guys coming on today to give us some of your time to help job seekers, especially in the military community. It means a lot. I know that you're each busy. Taylor had 500 some applications, so I'm sure a break sounds great. So we do really appreciate it. I think what would be really great is if we could just start with introductions to hear a little more about you. And I would love to hear a little about how you each recruit for different things and kind of how that's going to aid the perspective today. So whoever wants to start.
Awesome. Sounds great. I'll go ahead first. So thank you everyone for joining today. I'm Taylor. I am one of our talent acquisition specialists, and I do specifically support GuidePoint from an internship as well as a military fellowship recruitment standpoint. So I do recruit for all of our entry-level roles. And I give a couple little facts about me just so you can get to know me a little bit better. I am based in Tampa, Florida, and have lived in Florida my entire life. And I became a recruiter back in 2019 and have specialized in cybersecurity and IT ever since. So I really do love to help everyone with their resumes and their LinkedIn profiles to build out their personal brand. So I'm excited to kind of talk with you guys today and share some of our insight.
Awesome.
All right, I'll go.
Whomever.
Sorry, Karen, go ahead.
All right, I'm Karen Day. I've been with GuidePoint for a couple of years. I hate saying years of experience, but since Taylor did, I've got about 18 years of IT recruiting, including cybersecurity. A little bit about me, I live in Tampa, and I'm a massive Philadelphia Eagles fan.
All right, I'm also in Tampa. Karen and I go way back. That's how I ended up here at GuidePoint about a year and a half ago. We recruited together back in 2008, 2010, somewhere around there. So I've been in recruiting since about 2007 or so, and really been focused on the federal space for the last 10 years or so. So I'm the federal recruiter here at GuidePoint.
Awesome. Well, thank you each for coming on. Tampa sounds pretty amazing. I'm a little jealous. I'm in Orange County and it's somehow not sunny, even though it's Southern California. I'm pretty upset about it, but I'll move on. But so I kind of want to focus on following up on what Lori said, focus on the resume a little bit to get your perspective here. Maybe Karen, we can start with you. What do you look for on a resume and how can someone stand out from the rest?
Sure. So actually, I wouldn't mind seeing like an I love Casamigos email address on there. I kind of think that's kind of funny. But what I would typically look for, we're looking at resumes so quickly because like Taylor said, she had 500 resumes. On some of our high volume recs, we definitely get at least that. And so we might have a few seconds to kind of look for some buzzwords in the resume and then move on to the next person. And so we're looking at those last couple of jobs that you've had, and we're looking specifically for any keywords, any skills that are in the job description are required for the role to see if you have them in there. If there are certifications required, we're looking at the certification section. So just make sure when you are applying to a job, and I know like this, it can be a pain. It's like people say, job searching is really a full-time job, and it is, because when you're applying, you have to tailor your resume really to every single job unless they have the exact same requirements. And so recently I asked someone to please add some job descriptions in. I saw that he had been with a couple of great companies that we like to recruit from, and he told me he just simply didn't have the time to do it, and he's not interested in doing that. It's like, okay, well, we're not interested in hiring you. So I highly recommend to make sure that you have those requirements in the resume. If you don't meet all of those requirements, don't apply. And here's why. I had a name and resume come up this week, and I immediately recognized the name and recognized the resume. And the reason is because he has been applying to everything. And I know he can't be a fit for everything. And so someone like that, to me, is not focused, doesn't know what they want to do. And I don't want to waste my time trying to help them figure that out. They should know that before they're applying to the position. And so you just want to make sure that you do qualify for the position as well, or at least are very, very close to meeting years of experience or whatever it might be. Other than that, one thing that I do notice a lot on resumes when I first open them is grammatical errors. And like a common one for compliance, I see HIPAA spelled wrong all the time. And I kind of look for that now because I know that's a common thing. And I want someone who's detail oriented, because we need to know if you're putting together reports for our clients, we need to know that they're going to look professional, that they're going to be on point, and that you're going to take the time to make sure that they're correct. If you can't make sure that your resume is formatted properly and doesn't have grammatical errors, then we're not necessarily going to trust that you can do that for client work as well. And that's something that's very important.
No, I mean, that completely makes sense. I think especially, in an industry like you guys work into, where it is a lot of client facing work and it's sensitive, it's really important work that you're delivering. To have that kind of high level of attention to detail is really important. And so I guess that's, one thing for all the attendees here is there's so many things to consider when writing a resume of, oh, I want to frame my experience to meet this, I want to do that. But the stumbling block could be something as easy as a grammatical error of not looking it over before you send it in. So do that. That's really good insight, Karen. Thank you. Mike, we'll go ahead and pass it on to you.
All right, thanks. Yeah, just to tack on to some of the things that have already been said. I mean, you ask 10 different recruiters about your resume and you'll probably get 10 different responses. I mean, it is very much an art and not a science. So I wouldn't get too caught up on some of the gurus out there on LinkedIn that have all this resume advice. I think Lori had some really good points, and that you want to build your resume kind of around the job that you want and not necessarily what you've done. And the way to start with that is go look at some job descriptions of positions that interest you. I mean, there's plenty of them on Indeed and other places, and pick out the parts that you could say, well, I've done that, or maybe not, I haven't done that exactly, but I've done something similar, and that will help you kind of translate some of your military experience into something that's a little bit more commercial, or to transition from one career into another. And don't be afraid to have multiple resumes. I mean, I have a couple different resumes depending on what I've done in the past, because sometimes I was on the federal side, sometimes I wasn't, sometimes I was doing sales, sometimes just recruiting. So it's good to have different copies of that resume, but make sure you're sending the right one to the right job. As far as the length of the resume, I know a lot of the TAP programs say, keep it just to 1 page or 2 pages. And that is a fluid thing. I mean, the more experience you have, the longer your resume is going to be naturally. I mean, I've seen resumes that are 14, 15 pages, and that's just a waste of everyone's time. I mean, obviously, the further you go back chronologically, the less detail you need to show. Also Lori had mentioned, as far as the ATS goes, I was very appreciative that she didn't, I see that on LinkedIn all the time about, oh, you got rejected by the ATS. The ATS is a pretty dumb system. It's basically just a searchable database. It doesn't make any decisions for us, but it will strip out some of the information. And I had a candidate back in the day that I worked with a couple of times, that he was a very senior network engineer and he had all these certifications. And the one day he asked me, he said, Mike, why are you the only recruiter that ever calls me? And because I had hired him more than once. And I looked back at his resume, and all of his great certifications, he didn't actually have the certifications typed on his resume anywhere. He just had the Cisco logos for all of his different certifications. So our ATS wipes off those logos. So if you're looking at the resume in an ATS, none of those certifications were there. So that's something to be cautious of. And as Karen mentioned, we look at lots of resumes every day, and some people try to put artwork in pictures and stuff like that to make it stand out. And really, to me, that's a distraction. I would rather just see something that's a little just more professional, kind of almost cookie cutter, because it's easier for me to search for the information that I need to find.
Mike, that's an interesting kind of perspective there. And I mean, I've always had the idea of, don't go too fancy, don't, make it an art project. But I've also seen, folks who get a little creative and it doesn't look too horrible. But thinking about it from the recruiter perspective, if you're looking through so many, and that if there's kind of a broad variance in them, then you're going to be spending more time doing it. And it's kind of an inconvenience. And that's, obviously there's going to be no, personal bias or whatever, but if it helps, making it easier to find that information and those skills.
Right.
Which I think is really interesting. And something else I want to highlight that you said was looking at those various job descriptions, right? That's something I did when I got out of the service, because I talked about when Lori was on, I was an infantryman, and trying to find kind of where those skills transferred first to finance, then to consulting. Both I was like, I don't know. And then after a little bit of time, I was figuring it out, like, okay, some of my experiences actually do touch on this. We're training all these foreign militaries, we're dealing with contractors, we're doing all this stuff. There's a lot of client service aspect to that. Okay, how can I, kind of speak to that for client facing roles? And it goes on. And I think that there's folks that, when they do that research and they look into those roles, can find so many parallels between the things they've done. But Taylor, you want to go ahead and round us out here?
I'd love to. So as you all know, I specialize more with the internship and entry level basis of things. So I think what stands out to me when I'm looking at those resumes is if you don't have the professional experience within cybersecurity or computer networks and related to that, but listing on some extracurricular activities that you have that are related to cybersecurity on your resume definitely helps you stand out, whether that be you're studying for certifications and maybe you've got your exam date set already for it. So it's something to look forward to. We know that you're actively working on it. Maybe you're involved with some training programs, or you're working on individual projects related to programming or networking, or working on virtual machines, things even like Hack the Box, doing Capture the Flags, things like that, that even if you don't have the professional experience within your career section, you have all of these skill sets that can kind of help you stand out. So I think that's a lot of what I look for when it comes to those who are looking to break into cybersecurity.
Yeah, that is really helpful. And, I think a lot of the folks likely in this room are in that very boat of they're trying to find ways to supplement non-cyber related experience with something cyber related to show that they have those skills. And so there you go. I mean, I think hearing that the values placed on that is really good for a lot of folks, and, shows that you can work your way in. So for the next question, Karen, I'll go to you for this one. What should a candidate be prepared to discuss in an interview?
So one thing that I like to tell people before an interview to prepare is when you're on the spot, you sometimes forget what you're going to say, or you might forget to like the example you were going to give. So ahead of time, definitely write down 10 examples of your work or accomplishments that you're proud of that would be relevant to the role. And that way you can reference it while you're in the interview. Other than that, you're going to let the interviewer lead. And so you're going to talk about whatever they bring up, and make sure that you're keeping it concise as well, and ask checking questions. So checking questions are great because if you answer a question, you're not sure that's what they were looking for, you can ask, does that answer the question? Or would you like for me to give another example? It gives you 2 chances to answer the question how they're seeking for you to answer it. So that's helpful as well. But I think that's the number one thing, is just when you're interviewing, make sure that you're letting that person interviewing you lead and take their lead. I've heard this from many interviewers before, and this remains true. If the person interviewing you is doing most of the talking, it's usually a good interview. If you find yourself talking the majority of the time, it's usually not a very good interview.
That's interesting. That's helpful to kind of think about. And, I think going into the interview prepared is going to be kind of a catalyst to that success. And I like how it was, having those kind of things you can reference prepared. I think that's really important and something that I've heard a few times. But, I feel like, that there's certain questions that you're likely going to be asked, right? Tell me about yourself. Tell me about a time when X, tell me about a situation when, whatever it may be, but there's certain behavioral questions that occur really often. And I think having a couple stories to reference or things that you've accomplished really help, kind of speak to those and have an example. So that's really good advice. So Taylor, for the next question, kind of going further into that, preparing for an interview, how much should an interviewee know about the company?
Great question. So I would say the bare minimum, right, is to understand what the company does and what their purpose is. You can easily go on, a company's website, do some research and understand the purposes of what their business is and what they do. But I think going further into that, if you're just going to go onto the call and say, oh, for instance, GuidePoint, who are we to you? They'll just say, oh, I know you're a cybersecurity company, but they'll leave it at that. So you really want to be able to kind of show a little bit more effort on your part. I think personally, what I love is when I've had someone who's go ahead and done their research, but then they point out something that maybe not everyone points out, like our core values. We're very big here about our core values and what they mean to us, and they really make up who we are here at GuidePoint. So I have had like a lot of individuals come on and say, I saw your core values on your website. I see that, you don't tolerate jerks. One of our core values is no jerks. And they go on to say like how they love that to see that, we have that as a standpoint for who we are at GuidePoint. So I would just say bare minimum, understand what the company is, their purpose, but also be able to highlight some things that maybe don't stand out as much to other people, where we can really see that you did your research, you thoroughly learned more about our company. And that way you're standing out and you're being able to kind of differentiate yourself from just the normal response, oh, you're cybersecurity and that's all that you do. So I really think that knowing more than just the company's purpose is definitely important, and being able to highlight those little key aspects. We've even had someone who said, oh, I actually watched your YouTube videos from your company's YouTube page and I learned more about the structure of some aspects of your business. I heard from your, managing partners or your CEO, your founder. And it was really cool to be able to see that someone took more initiative.
It is really cool. And, I guess looking a little deeper into that, when somebody's, doing their preparation prior to this interview, what sources would be a good spot to look? Would you say website, investor presentations? What do you think would be, because, you want, I guess, a little bit of a deeper look than just the mission vision?
Of course. Yeah, I would say, first and foremost, the website. Typically, if a company has a website, which, they all should, there's going to be a lot of details about who they are and what they do. But when you really look into that, you can find a lot about, on the About Us page, or even just doing some general research, on your own, typing in the company's name into your search engine and seeing what comes up. But I would say the website as well as the LinkedIn profile, I think would be great, because on LinkedIn, most companies are posting a lot about their company or their events or their initiatives. So you'll be able to kind of take a deeper dive. So I would say LinkedIn and the website would be the two best sources.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And it's interesting, I think that helps people in a lot of ways too, even if they kind of do that before pre-interview, when they're looking for companies to apply to, if they do a little just deeper look, I feel like that can help their resume, the entire process, honestly, to understand exactly what it is the company does and cares about on a little bit of a deeper level past that job description. All right, cool. So for the next question, Mike, kind of looking at this interview and job search process, what's the role of the recruiter? And then from a candidate standpoint, do they come to you with questions? Do they talk to hiring managers? How's that structure work there?
Yeah, the recruiter is always going to be your liaison with the company. I mean, you don't. It's not going around the recruiter, but if you're going to burn bridges if you reach out directly to the managers in most cases. In addition to hiring, they have a day-to-day job that they're doing. They're managing their current employees. They're dealing with customers, and they're putting out fires. And really, that's what we're here for, is to manage the communication. We have a cadence with our managers, and we know how to approach them with things. So it's always best to use your recruiter as the main point of contact, unless we tell you otherwise. I mean, for me, for example, we're hiring a lot of people onto contract supporting the DoD and the intel agencies. And so at some point during the process, I always have to make an introduction to someone from our project management office to kind of handle the process once we get through the initial interviews. But yeah, if you ever have any questions, ask the recruiters. I mean, even sending a follow-up email, to say thank you for your time after an interview, it's best to send that to the recruiter and ask them to forward that to the manager.
Gotcha. Yeah, like relay my thanks for your time today.
Right.
Awesome. No, that definitely makes sense. So I guess the recruiter is the intermediary, and that's a good source. And I guess going off that as well, are questions, are they seen in a negative light? Are they somewhat welcome to the recruiter's end? What would you say about that, Mike? Is it welcomed? How do you see candidates emailing you maybe after, before, anything?
Yeah, for the most part, I mean, it's a positive sign that they're interested and they are still engaged. When we don't hear anything from a candidate, sometimes that's a little bit worrisome. But yeah, it's certainly okay to hit us up with more questions. Especially if you're emailing. I mean, if you're calling us constantly, I mean, we're as Taylor mentioned, our schedules are pretty packed. So email is usually the best form of contact, and then we can always schedule another call with you if necessary. But yeah, it's definitely welcome.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Thanks for answering that.
Sure.
Karen, when now looking at kind of the initial screen, how can somebody give a strong introduction during that initial screen and really set themselves apart as a candidate?
Sure. So the first thing I would say is don't just start giving an introduction. I've had this happen on many occasions before I get a chance to ask the first question. And for an overview of their last couple of positions, they start just talking and talk for 10 minutes without stopping. Right then I know that it's not going to work. So you want to make sure that the person asks you the question first. Tell me about, this experience or this or that, and they'll kind of tell you what they're looking for, or what they want to hear. So make sure you follow that. But in terms of if they ask for just, a 2-minute spiel, keep it to 2 minutes. And I would keep any overview, any answer to any question, I would keep it 2 minutes. Like, make it concise, because they do have a list that they need to get through, and you want to make sure that they're getting all of the information that they need in order to move you forward. But make it brief. Talk about your last couple of roles, how they're relevant to the position that you're applying for. Talk about your interest in the position and your interest in the company. And this is another opportunity for you to show that you have done your research on the company and the position, and that what that role will entail. A lot of times in this piece as well, you might want to talk about how you are connected to someone, whether it's maybe you went to the same college, maybe you are connected to some of the same people, you attended the same conference, whatever it might be. You might want to say, oh, I'm actually also a member of this, and I saw that you're a member of this. You want to find that common ground with someone, and sometimes this is an easy way to throw something in that would resonate with the person that's interviewing you, which you should have already done your research. You should have already looked them up and Googled them and figured out kind of what their history is and their background.
Right. No, that makes complete sense. That's funny at the beginning, 10 minutes of talking, like, hi, I'm Karen. Nice to meet you. But no, that's really helpful. Going off that, Taylor, when you're looking at a candidate and you're talking to them during a phone screen, what are some things that can turn you off from that candidate, or some of the common pitfalls that you see?
Great question. I do have a few, but I'll try to keep them concise. So I would say one, if the expectations for your call with your interviewer is having camera on, video requirements, definitely join the call with video on and be prepared. I have seen a lot of the time where, I put those expectations in my email request to them for the interview. And I've had many individuals join not addressing that they're not on video or not having the capabilities to be on video. I think a lot of the time with these remote environments, there is a lot of virtual interactions. So it does help to have that face-to-face interaction. And when those expectations are set as a requirement for your interview, you want to make sure that you are looking at those details and abiding by that. Of course, situations change. And if there's issues or someone's having technical difficulties or something came up last minute, Of course, what's best then is to let your interviewer know, talk with them, email them, call them, whatever you need to do to say, hey, my situation's changed. I might not be able to, meet this requirement. Do you still want to have our call now? Or, do you want to reschedule when we can both be on video? I will say that's a huge one for me. Or I've had someone hop on video and they were taking a walk, and it was very distracting. So their environment was very distracting because essentially, I don't mind if you're outside. I don't mind if you have to be in a closet, wherever you need to be, right? Everyone has to have a quiet space, and I get that. But taking a walk definitely isn't ideal while you're on camera. And at first he didn't join on camera because, he thought, oh, maybe I could get by. And I said, hey, are you able to join on camera? And he popped on, but yeah, he was taking a stroll around the park, and, it was beautiful scenery, but maybe not the best time to do so. Another thing I would say is, don't interrupt the interviewer when they are speaking. A lot of the time we kind of get a little excited, right, to answer a question or to chime in, but it's really good to kind of just hold back, let the interviewer, talk, ask a question, whatever it might be, because a lot of the time what can happen is, especially over Zoom, it's going to be hard, and it's okay, if we all kind of speak over each other, it's going to happen. Usually when you are in person, it's not as likely, but over these virtual platforms, you can kind of just be unsure who's gonna talk next. So I would say it's important though to let the interviewer get their questions, their comments out prior to you jumping in, because you actually never know what they were going to say next, which could result in you missing out on a key item that maybe they wanted to mention or ask you. And then another thing, and this is kind of related to what Karen just said, is don't elaborate so much when answering a question that you completely steer the conversation into an entirely new direction. You want to provide enough detail, right? You want to make sure you're painting that picture of your skill set, of your knowledge, but you don't want to really take away from the question itself and your answer to it by adding on too many things. So I would say those are the few things there that definitely kind of make me feel a little weary about, the candidates that I'm speaking with when I come across those situations.
No, definitely. I mean, that makes complete sense. And, something I think is, a lot of people face now is the virtual thing, right? Of doing the virtual interviews and all that. And I think the camera on thing is a pet peeve for me too. And I join a lot of calls, but it's, I think in this environment we live in now, especially if you're working remotely, if you're doing a hybrid thing, if you're applying for one of those roles, I feel like it's so important to demonstrate your, competent ability to use these platforms that, if you can't join with video, it's like, okay, well, and you're going to be using this every day to work, this might be an issue. So that was interesting. And, I think setting the environment to succeed, right? So before every interview I've done, I've kind of sat down, got myself alone, looked over this stuff. I've researched about the company a little, and been sitting kind of camera on, nice blurred background, everything you have to do, but really taking, 15 minutes before the interview, you can completely kind of change the first impression by not being maybe walking through a dog park or whatever it may have been, which I think is, it's great. So moving forward, now looking at, our audience here, or I guess a large portion of it, Mike, specifically for transitioning military, what do you want to see from them?
For one, be memorable. Lori kind of talked earlier about, not being a jack of all trades. And I know that's, and to have that mentality in the military is definitely promoted to say, all right, whatever your job is for me. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I got you. I'm going to learn it if I don't know it. You have to remember that, in the civilian world, these managers, they have, specific positions for you to fill, and they want someone that is passionate about that job and not just somebody that is just, I'm just looking for a job, I'm happy with whatever, because that person is not going to be there for a long time. And as I mentioned earlier, managers, they have a lot of things that they need to do other than hire people, and so they don't want to be constantly hiring people. So the way to get around that is to, make sure you do your research and make sure you understand the job description and what the company does, and that you can show passion for not just getting a job, but that job, and that manager knows that you really are interested in that job. I've definitely had some interviews where a manager gets back to me And I'm all excited because I think the person's a perfect fit. And the manager will say, well, yeah, they're capable of the job. I don't think they really wanted the job. They didn't seem interested. So you definitely want to show your interest and, be memorable and, talk specifically about that job and not just say, I'm adaptable. I can figure out anything, because that's a soft skill and it's not really what the manager is looking for. Again, they want someone that is looking for that job, not just any job.
Yep, no, I completely agree. And I think that's a kind of a common theme we've heard. There's actually two to kind of highlight. Is one is, targeting your search, right? And knowing what it is that you want to do. People aren't hiring generalists. They're hiring somebody who can solve that, allocated problem set to that job description.
Absolutely.
And the second one that I miss is that during the interview, recruiters are guiding the interview, which I think, just that is an overarching notion. Don't go on a 10-minute tangent. Don't, change the topic. Give them the information they're looking for, because they're trying to evaluate you. And if you make their life easy, hopefully it makes them like you a little more. But moving forward, so Karen, let's talk about after the interview now. You think it's necessary for a candidate to follow up with you?
So like Mike said, showing interest in a job is very important. So the first follow-up really should be from the candidate after the interview, thanking you for the interview. This is more rare these days, so it's not a necessity, but it will make you stand out more. And a lot of times these are so well written about, I really enjoyed our conversation and learning more about GuidePoint. I feel like I would be a match because of this. And here's what I love about the company. And I really feel like I can help and add value. And the team sounds amazing. Just anything like that makes us excited to hear that. And so I forward those along to the hiring manager after I've already submitted the candidate as a hey, see this candidate even followed up, this is what we're looking for. So that's going to make a favorable impression to start out. Now, in terms of following up for feedback after that, it really depends. I try to keep in touch with my candidates and try to provide feedback as quickly as possible so that they don't have to follow up. So it's not very often that I have candidates following up, but it is definitely appropriate if you haven't heard back in, a week, sometimes even just, if it's 4 days and you've got another offer and you need to know, definitely tell us. So we need to know that you have another offer. That's actually one of the questions that I ask in every single phone screen is if you're close to any other offers, what kind of time crunch are we in here, so that we know and we can help push the process along with managers. So it's good to keep that open communication. You don't want to drive your recruiter crazy by following up every day. Maybe ask them, when's a good time for me to follow up next if you haven't heard back. But I will tell you 100% of the time, the recruiter is going to reach out if they want to schedule an interview. The recruiter is going to reach out if we want to make you an offer. So it's not a situation where if you're not hearing back, it's because someone isn't interested or the job isn't moving forward yet. And most of the time, the recruiter has no information to give because we do try to follow up as quickly as we can.
Definitely. That's really helpful. And I think, one of the things I've heard be asked and I've wondered about too, is having those competing timelines and potentially competing offers. Is it a transparency thing? Do you just tell them, or what do you do in that situation? I think it's really good to know from the recruiter's perspective that you want that transparency and to know, because, you might want to put in an offer before they get there, whatever it may be. You at least might want to have a chance to give them one that competes. So having that kind of openness and that transparency, I think is really good. That's interesting to hear from you. Thank you. For Taylor, should a candidate address any gaps in their resume? Let's say somebody, took a couple of years off.
Yeah, I will say, it is common for people to have periods of time where they weren't employed, due to whatever reasons, if it's personal, if it's not. I think it's important to be upfront about it. I don't necessarily believe that you have to go ahead and put your personal details as to the reasons why you have a gap. I know that there have been reasons for family medical issues or personal medical issues and things like that. That is, of course, at your own, discretion, and no need to share that with potential employers if you're not comfortable doing so. But I think there's a way to address those gaps. I know that seeing resumes previously, and even for instance, I had an individual who had a resume and I was looking through the resume so quickly, I didn't really notice the gap at first. I was like, moving forward with the process. And then I went back and kind of looked at it a little bit more thoroughly, and I saw that there was about like 4 years of no experience. They weren't in school. It wasn't mentioned about any kind of other extracurricular things going on at that time. And I thought, uh-oh, I might have made a mistake. I need to kind of address this and find out the situation. And so we kind of just suggested for that individual to go ahead and put a little snippet on their resume. Maybe it's a bullet point in the experience section that just says, gap can be explained, or, gap due to personal reasons, or this is what I did during this time to keep my skills fresh in the meantime until I found my next role. Or maybe it's in a summary, just talking a little overview about kind of their situation of, this is my background. I took a break for a little bit, but worked on X, Y, and Z types of projects or trainings, or my own just individual efforts. I think it's important to address it because that transparency, I think, is overall the most important thing that we look for from a candidate. And so even from a resume, sometimes if recruiters or those reviewing resumes see that gap and there's no real explanation or something to kind of help shed some light, it can kind of be a little bit confusing. And some recruiters, unfortunately, might not take that initiative to reach out to understand that situation. So I think it's important to just kind of put on the resume your situation, address it, of course, without putting personal details if you're not comfortable doing so. And I don't even suggest, even if you are comfortable doing so, I don't think you need to put, was helping a family member with, a medical issue or anything like that. I think it's just important to address the situation, to say, hey, I know there's a gap on my resume, but this is my qualifications because this is what I've done in the meantime during that gap period.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And, I think that there is a good way to put it too. I really liked what you said of, you could put, this is what I've done to keep my skills sharp in the meantime, right? I think that's a really good way to word it and gives you a chance to showcase some of the stuff you have been working on. It's really helpful. So this is the last one of the questions we have. And then if you guys are okay with it, I'd love to do one or two of the questions we've gotten from the audience. Awesome. Fantastic. Sweet. So this is for Mike. And this is a really important question. So it can definitely feel awkward coming out of the military. When's it appropriate to discuss the salary of a position?
Of course, you keep that for last, the most important part.
Yeah, right.
The salary conversation should really start before you're talking to recruiters and to hiring managers. That's something you really got to dig into ahead of time. Talk to other folks that that are in industry. You have to be careful, though. I mean, some people like to brag about salaries and maybe they're not really being truthful. So definitely do some research online on salary.com, and there's a lot of other websites that you can look that up, but also keep in mind the location of the job. I talk to folks all the time. So being down here in Tampa, it's fairly low cost of living, no state income tax. And I get people all the time that are in DC metro area that are like, oh, I want a job at MacDill Air Force Base. Like, okay, sure, but you're going to take like a 30 to 40% pay cut because that's just the cost of living difference. And people have a tough time wrapping their head around that. So, definitely make sure when you're doing your research that you look into the location. But as far as having the actual conversation, again, kind of let the recruiter, lead towards that. You don't want to get into the salary right ahead, right away, because, that recruiter might have multiple positions that they're thinking about. And they have a lot of different questions to ask you before they even get to the salary. And, as an interviewee, you always want to take, you want to take every interview you can. Always get that experience with interviewing, and don't have them cut short an interview because you immediately jump out and say, oh, well, what's the salary on this position? Like Karen said, let the recruiter lead that, and don't just jump in there right away. And because then you're just going to sour that call right there, and probably the relationship with that recruiter. And every situation is going to be different. In certain circumstances, we have a set salary for the position, or a range. Other times we know we need someone, and we don't know what the range is yet. So that's, typically as a recruiter, I'm going to ask someone, what range are you looking for? Right. And it's this is where you need to understand, what is going to be appropriate for your level of experience, and for that particular job. And, and to be able to back up your salary request with saying, okay, well, I have this many years of experience, I have these certifications, this degree, and to be able to talk to, why you're targeting that particular salary. And in most cases, we're more than happy to have a conversation with you. If you're off base, we're going to tell you. If you're way off base and you're asking for like 50% more than what we're going to pay, we're probably not going to be able to move forward, because that, if you were to suddenly say, I want 200,000. Oh, well, the job only pays 100,000. Okay, I'm fine with that. Well, that's not very realistic. And there's a major disconnect there. And either you're really looking for that $200,000 job and you think you're worth it, and you're not going to be happy, working for us at 100,000, or, you just really haven't done your research, and that's something that we're going to notice.
Right. Yeah, no, that completely makes sense. I think a good benchmarking tool, right? There's all those websites that have salaries here, salaries there. I think those are a good place to start. But I also think, doing Veterati calls, doing mentoring calls, and talking to people in the industry. You don't have to say, how much do you make a year? But you could say, hey, for a first year XYZ, what do you think would be a reasonable expectation? And get a range, right? Because then you can at least have that range from somebody who's experienced in the industry and likely play some part in, setting a similar range at their company. That was a great answer. Thanks so much. So this is one from the audience. Thanks so much for sending this in. And Taylor, I'm going to direct this one at you because I think it speaks to what you recruit for. Two-parted. One, does GuidePoint really hire for entry-level cybersecurity? So I heard there's no such thing as entry-level cybersecurity. And then the second part is, if you do hire somebody who's, let's say, a newbie to cybersecurity, do you help develop and kind of mentor them to learn and be successful on the job?
Yeah, great questions. So I will say, yes, we do hire entry level. What that means to everyone could be different. I will say our internship program is meant for those who maybe are just starting out. They have some type of basic foundational knowledge in the space. They don't have to necessarily have a career in it. And that's why we offer our internship programs, because it provides a lot of training and development. And what we do is we help set you up for success. So within those maybe 12 weeks, for an internship or whatever it looks like for that individual, we are tailoring your internship to have you specialize in a particular area that we have as a full-time opportunity for you at the end of it. Of course, no guarantees with internships and the process to getting a full-time role. It's all about, the matchmaking and making sure it's a good fit for you and what you're looking for, as well as you for us. But essentially speaking, with that training and development piece, we are making sure that we're providing you with the right knowledge for the tool sets we use, the platforms, the softwares, and what it is our business flow kind of looks like when it comes to that experience level. You'll be able to kind of gain that experience through the internship, through development. We do provide, certification vouchers. So we will provide all those study materials, training materials for you to be able to become that professional that you need to be in that space, and try to set you up with a full-time role at that level that you are now at, because you had that training and development experience. So I know I kind of just answered in somewhat, those two parts in one, but as for that mentoring, we are very big about making sure that we provide you with the right materials to become the cybersecurity professional that you're looking to be. So we're of course not going to handhold anybody or, have you start completely from scratch with absolutely no understanding of cybersecurity whatsoever. That's not what our program's kind of meant for. What it's meant for internally here at GuidePoint is to provide you with the success that you can have in what you're looking to achieve, but that you're coming in with that basic foundational knowledge that you can get on your own. There's a lot of free resources, a lot of research that you can do to kind of gear yourself up to be able to fit one of those roles. And then having that entry level, internship to get you into the right position is definitely possible. And we provide those specialty tracks for you so that you can become a subject matter expert, in a particular tool or software or whatever it might be, and the clients that we work with to be able to kind of help set you up for success when it comes to a career path.
Definitely. No, that definitely makes sense. I mean, it sounds like it it is really a great program to where you're getting the chance to get both, the vouchers to do the training, get your certifications, but also that mentorship piece of a little bit of guidance and, an idea of what the industry really looks like moving forward. So I think that's awesome. And that really helps answer that question. I'm sure Kevin will probably give some insight into the roles you guys have coming up as well. So I think it was Jose who asked that question. If you stick around for a little more, you'll get even more insight. The next question, we got two more, and then we're going to switch over to Kevin's portion. And for all those listening, interested in the giveaway, that's going to happen at the very end, right before we sign off after Kevin's portion. So stay tuned. But the question is, what is the best way to network with recruiters, specifically how to stand out? And this is open to any of the three, if anybody wants to take a stab at it.
I'll go ahead and start. Yeah, it's good to hit us up on LinkedIn and kind of, introduce yourself and let us know what you're looking to do. And, sometimes we may not have a job for you right away. So it's good to start building that relationship early. Especially coming out of the military, a lot of folks are used to having their orders, months ahead of time and know what they're doing. But you got to remember that most commercial companies, they're hiring about 30 days out. So it doesn't hurt to start building that relationship early.
Definitely. That definitely makes sense. So I guess, from your standpoint, you're not opposed to a candidate, connecting with you on LinkedIn and reaching out with a brief introduction.
Absolutely not. No, that's great. It shows an initiative and that they're truly interested and especially if it's a personalized, introduction and asking specific questions and not just saying, well, how do I start my job search? They have to be more targeted questions and, and like Taylor was talking about before, if you've done some research and you say, oh, I like this about, GuidePoint, or, I saw this in your background and, that's what relationship building is.
Definitely.
LinkedIn has kind of that cookie cutter response that you can send to a recruiter. Don't use that. We really are not going to respond to that as much because you haven't taken the time to say anything unique. And we get a lot of those that people just hit a button after they apply and there's really no effort put into it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I like that. Okay, got it, or whatever it is right there at the bottom. Gotcha. Okay, and the last question we have before we go into Kevin's portion is this a little more specific. We have an individual who separated from the service at a more senior rank, who applies to more junior level roles and gets told he's overqualified. But then when he moves up a step to the more senior level roles, he lacks the experience for the corporate world, so he's not getting that call back. Do you have any suggestions kind of on how to combat that? Maybe how to kind of supplement that experience he has as a leader and in the military with some corporate experience? What would you say for that? I want to open to any of the three. I know it's a more specific case here.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is going to come down to the individual companies. Like I have a good friend that he's a retired captain out of the Army, and he was telling me, he's like, I got turned down for a job because they said I had no leadership experience. It's like, what do you think I was doing as a captain in the Army? Some companies are not going to get it. It's that this is where it's really important to tailor your resume towards the job, and it's okay to leave some stuff off. Sometimes you don't necessarily have to have every single thing on the resume. So sometimes it's good to start your resume a little bit into your career and maybe not show as much experience if that's what the job calls for. And again, having different copies of your resume may be useful for different positions that you're applying for.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think really finding that target and pointing in that direction is going to be the challenge, and then looking through that experience and what speaks to that position specifically. But yeah,
salary too, just to add to that, because if we see someone with a lot of experience, we're going to think that they're going to be asking a higher salary. So if there is a place where you can fill that in, be realistic, because if you're putting that you want 120 on an entry level job that pays 70 to 80, you're not going to be considered. So just make sure that you're realistic with that and that it matches what the job would be.
Definitely. Yep, that completely makes sense. And that's actually really helpful because I think that's a good way to kind of dispel that. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you guys so much for coming on. I know it's Friday and you've got a weekend ahead of you and all kinds of fun things hopefully to do. And so I appreciate you taking your Friday afternoons to come on, help job seekers, help Boots to Books. It's really appreciated. And it's not lost on me that it is Friday and it'd be a lot easier to, do anything else. So thank you guys so much. GuidePoint Security, just amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sweet. And now up next is another individual from GuidePoint Security, the great Kevin Woods. I have been connected with Kevin for some time. He's been kind enough to support Boots to Books events, be a really big advocate for military veterans and cybersecurity folks breaking into the industry as a whole. He's done some really amazing things in his career and is now at a really interesting spot at GuidePoint Security University that I'm sure he'll touch a little bit more on. But without further ado, Kevin, I'd love to hand the mic over to you, hear more about GuidePoint and just get the ball rolling.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Peter. Can we just get head nod or something that we're good to go here? All right, perfect. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining and good afternoon. Happy to be here on a Friday afternoon and you're kind of stuck with me for the next hour or so here. But yeah, I'm here to talk about getting started in cybersecurity. And before I do, just a big thank you to Peter and Boots to Books and that whole organization for putting this all together. They really do have a tremendous mission to help transitioning service members and veterans to, that are looking to start a new career or to go back to school, to get educated, and overall just to ensure that our veterans are landing on their feet and have the opportunities within the civilian world. So a big thank you to them. Thank you to all of our recruiters at GuidePoint. Karen, Taylor, and Mike are just phenomenal. They got a lot of experience there. And then sound like Lori had a ton of great insight. I was listening in there as well. So I hope everyone's paying attention and was able to get some good information out of that and took some notes and stuff. So I think I am going to address some of the questions too that were posed to the recruiters during this talk. So if you do have questions throughout, please see the chat. I know they're telling you to email to Tom there, and Tom, feel free to, pop in. I'll take a pause at every section that I have here if you want to ask questions kind of along the way. But anyway, let's get into why I'm here. So talking to you about getting started in cybersecurity, and this is for everyone out there, whether you've never heard of cybersecurity, if you've never done IT, or you've done a little bit of IT work in the past, and now you're interested in learning more. I know there was a question about, is there even really entry-level roles in cybersecurity? Short answer, yes, but we'll get into that. Or if you've been doing 20 years of cyber operations and you're looking to retire, right? I'm really hoping that no matter your background, that you'll be able to take something from this presentation and it'll help you land a job regardless of the company or whatever position you go for. So with that being said, let's take a look at the agenda real quick. First up, I got an introduction on myself, about my company, and then we'll get into all that fun, good stuff. So we'll start with why even this industry, why cybersecurity? And then we'll move into some of the different roles within the industry overall before talking about how do you go and build your foundations out and learn some of the tools that we're using on a day-to-day basis. And then finally, we'll talk about, getting the job and standing out from the crowd. How do you go in and do that? And I think a lot of that has probably been covered already by some of the resources we've had talking to you, but I got my own little tips and tricks that I'll give you at the end here too. So please, like I said, feel free to email over the questions and we'll try to get to them as we can, but let's get into it. I'm Kevin Woods, as Peter was saying. I'm the director of GuidePoint Security University, or you can call it GPSU, which ultimately it's a training and development program that we established here at GuidePoint back in 2021. I've been fortunate enough to kind of see it since its inception, and we do a ton of work with veterans, with nonprofit organizations, and more recently, we're getting into universities as well. And really, this was all put together to address the talent shortage that existed within the industry. But yeah, just, looking at me and kind of my background, I actually studied biology in college, so I wasn't thinking about cybersecurity at all. And that's just to mention, hey, you don't need a formal education in cybersecurity itself. If you have a degree in something else, that's okay. If you're in a degree program for cybersecurity, that's even better type of deal. But we have a lot of different backgrounds with professionals in this industry, and people come from a lot of different areas, right? And so you don't need to have the straight, I went to, graduated high school, went to college for cybersecurity and got a job as a SOC analyst and moved on. No, we have all different roundabout ways of getting here. And so we're going to kind of take you through a lot of those different steps and see how you can, really get that first job within the industry. But my background, I spent 7 years in the Army, started off Intel, went through basic training as an E4, then ended up going to officer candidate school and applied to become a cyber operations officer, was lucky enough to be selected. And I should say I was in the 101st Airborne Air Assault. I know some people will be offended if they're in the 101st and I don't mention that. But when I was getting out of the military, I ended up doing a SkillBridge internship with GuidePoint. And honestly, I had never heard of a SkillBridge internship, and I had never heard of GuidePoint Security either. And really that ended up being one of the best things I could have done with my career. And for any of you out there that are still, serving active duty, they're looking to separate in the next, 6 months to a year, you should really check out the Career Skills program on the Army side or the SkillBridge program for all the other branches. It's really an excellent opportunity where you get to go work for a company for your last 3 to 6 months or so and go out into industry and really just establish yourself and learn some of the tools that exist. But when I was going through the SkillBridge, got a bunch of certifications, fell in love with the company, ended up getting a full-time offer at GuidePoint to be a security automation engineer, and was also lucky enough to finish up my master's and more recently use my GI Bill to get an MBA from Johns Hopkins. But I love this company, definitely a big supporter of all the people that are looking to get into cybersecurity overall, and those of you who've served our country. So, thank you for being here today and for your service all around. But that's enough about me. Let's talk about the company I work for, right? So who is GuidePoint Security? Well, we're a cybersecurity consulting firm. That's all we do. We have about 800 employees at this time, and we're located in nearly every state in the country, including Alaska and Hawaii. And we're a largely remote workforce. But we do, as Mike kind of alluded to, we do have quite a few people that work in person on the federal side. So we provide both commercial and federal work. Our federal employees deal a lot with the different DoD organizations, and we have contracts with, I think, over 2/3 of the government agencies now. And so we have all that on the federal side. We also have a very large commercial team that does a lot of work with Fortune 500 companies and basically spans all the different geographical regions and all the different industries within the US. And really, I think what sets us apart from competitors is that we're not just a consulting firm. We're a cybersecurity consulting firm, right? There's a little difference there. So instead of having a small team of security consultants that are very generalized, like many consulting companies, we have teams across all areas of cybersecurity that become very specialized in what they do. And I know Taylor mentioned this, but part of our GPSU, part of our training program is that we help you get up to speed and learn one of those different specialties, and it makes you more marketable out in the industry. So we do have consulting teams that span everything from offensive to defensive and everything in between. And we'll talk a little bit about those roles here, coming up. But all right, let's get into the good stuff here, right? So I want to start off by talking about why I'm even here today, talking to you about cybersecurity. And, for starters, I work in the field, right? So does my company. So it's a little close to home. We're always looking for talent. If you're interested, you should definitely reach out to our GPSU alias. You'll find our careers page has a bunch of different jobs available. If you're looking for entry level, email our GPSU alias. So, but yeah, it's close to home for us, and it gives me a chance to get some of you interested in the cybersecurity field if you're just, kind of thinking about getting into it. Second, this is a very fast growing industry. I don't know if you're going to find another area of expertise that has this many job opportunities as this one. In fact, the last I saw, we're running about 4 million job openings in the US alone for cybersecurity professionals. And so there's a lot of room for growth and a lot of jobs out there. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, like, how are there that many jobs, right? And it's so difficult to get in. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about too, is there's a significant talent gap that exists within the industry, which can make it really difficult to land an entry-level job, despite all of those job openings available. And so for this next little bit, I'm going to talk about that talent gap, and then we'll talk about some different ways to bridge that gap overall. All right. So when we say that a talent gap exists, this isn't just a phrase I'm using. It's not a phrase that my company's using. This has turned into an industry-wide problem that companies have been looking to address over the past several years, right? Is how do we, fix this idea of the talent gap? And what I mean by talent gap is that we have all these job seekers, right? On one side that they're motivated, they're willing to learn, they're looking to get into the field. And then we have this big gap. And then on the other side, right, we have all these job openings, those 4 million job openings. And these are coming from employers that are looking for experienced candidates. But the problem is that there aren't that many experienced candidates remaining. And so we have too many positions and not enough experience to go around. And so the logical solution is to go out, find people that are interested in the industry and train and develop them, right? Grow that talent pool a bit. Unfortunately, though, not a lot of companies are willing to take on somebody that is brand new to the industry because, let's face it, there's a lot of risk involved with employees that don't have experience in this field. And to amplify that risk, we are talking about a field that has a lot of inherent risk to begin with. As I think Peter was kind of getting at earlier, right? For instance, if we just throw somebody into a penetration test that has no experience, even if they do a bunch of formal knowledge, they might enter into an environment they've never seen before, because a lot of networks, it's not what you'll find in a book or in a training course. It's going to be a lot different. And if that person happens to the wrong command at the wrong time, they could by themselves shut down that entire company network, which if we're talking about a retail company, that might cost them millions of dollars if they can't be out making sales. On the defensive side, if you want an example there, if we throw in an inexperienced security engineer into the mix and they need to architect a new SIM solution, well, they could unknowingly create a network vulnerability. They could leave out an alert that needs to happen, or they can expose a piece of data, which that could lead to a data breach or to a compromise. And again, you could have huge ramifications. And so to bridge kind of this gap that exists, right, companies need to be willing to help job seekers gain a little bit of experience. And we're working that on the industry side, right? Companies are getting together and trying to figure out, how do we generate the new wave of cybersecurity professionals? And on the job seeker side, right, what you have to do is you have to find a way to lessen that amount of assumed risk to that potential employer. And I think a lot of that risk that normally exists, right, it's kind of due to a lot of these barriers of entry. And you'll have to bear with me. I love animations, and I became a PowerPoint ranger when I was serving on the officer role. But when we look at these barriers to entry here, right, I talk about having a limited knowledge of security roles. And what I mean there is that there's so many different positions out there. I know Lori alluded to this and it's been brought up before. And really, these positions, they may vary drastically in terms of what someone does on a day-to-day basis, or we might have 2 different position titles for the exact same thing. So it can be a lot. It can be pretty confusing. And for a hiring manager, it's very risky to hire someone who doesn't know what they want to do, or even what the job entails, because if they aren't confident in their duties, it can lead to mistakes. But also there's a high chance that new hire doesn't enjoy their job. And so they end up leaving or not becoming a high performing worker because they just don't like what they do. And so now that hiring manager has wasted a bunch of resources and a bunch of time to get that person trained up. And especially in this industry, the bench cost to train someone is extremely high compared to other industries. So they're essentially wasting those different resources, right? The second barrier I have listed is a lack of technical application. And this goes hand in hand with experience, right? But for instance, I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with somebody during an interview who has Splunk or CrowdStrike or Palo Alto on their resume, and they have done some online training on tool. They watched a video, but they've never actually used it. And those are 2 entirely different things, right? There's a huge difference between knowing what the tool is and being able to actually utilize it. And so, you might get this too with not just tools, but with techniques of a particular attack. So if we're saying, a DNS poisoning attack, or even like how encryption works, right? You may be able to explain how it's done and you might be able to recognize it, but if you're not able to actually do it and to monitor it and know exactly what it's going to look like on a log, it's going to be a whole different thing for you. And unfortunately, in a lot of formal training environments, we have yet to kind of hit that point where we're offering those technical applications. And so again, there's that risk to the hiring manager that you're either going to struggle to learn the technical piece of these tools, or that you just won't even enjoy that piece of it, right? And then we're back to square one where you don't enjoy the job and you've, basically taken up a spot and now you're back out into the field. The third barrier I have here, and again, these are all kind of linked together, right? Is that one thing that, I kind of see all the time is people are trying to go out there and learn different tools. But one thing that people love to list out on their resumes, they love to talk about during job interviews, is that they've used Wireshark in the past. And Wireshark, it's a great tool. We use it to train all the time. I have it listed later in this presentation. But in reality, nobody in industry is using Wireshark. No one. It's not an effective tool for what we're looking to do. It's just a training tool for the most part. And so what employers want to see is not that listed necessarily on your resume. It's okay to list that, but we want to know those big name vendors that are being used in the industry. Tell us about the Palo Altos, about the CrowdStrikes, right? Tell us about Cisco and AWS. We want to see that you're using the tools that we actually use on a day-to-day basis within the industry. And you'll actually be surprised at how many of those vendors actually offer entirely free downloads and versions of those tools. And I guarantee you download those tools, you start messing around, you're really going to separate yourself out from a bit of the competition. But so now that we know, kind of the barriers involved and the risk involved, right? How are we going to bridge this gap? And so what I want to do is directly address kind of these three pillars here that help us get from, job seeker to employee. And so I'll speak to you a little bit about learning the roles and then establishing technical foundations and then overall gaining experience with some of those different industry tools that we have. But before I get into security roles, I don't know, Tom, if there's been any questions you want me to answer right now.
Looks like we're good to go. You can keep moving.
All right, let's keep going. So the security roles. I know we get tons of questions about this, and the recruiters and Lori were mentioning this earlier. It's a hard thing to talk about. It's a hard thing to understand, and there is no exact diagram or any one way to break up the different areas of cybersecurity. There are many, many different job roles out there, and they're all called different things, even if they mean the same thing, right? Frankly, this is just my personal depiction of how to approach understanding the different areas of cybersecurity. And so if you talk to somebody else, they're likely to call these areas something else or break it down differently, and that's okay, right? But what I want to do is start off by breaking it into defense versus offense. And I'll say right off the bat, there's a lot more jobs on the defensive side, even though everybody wants to go offensive, but obviously we'll talk about both of them here. So when we break it down on the defensive side, I like to think of these roles in terms of operations and engineering. And so we have the ONI, you might have heard of ONINet in the military, right? Ops and Intel. That's kind of how I like to break it down. So that includes a lot of our security operations. So you have your SOC analysts, your threat hunters, your CTI analysts, incident response teams. Those are the things that are happening on a 24/7 basis. You're actively responding to those different threats that are coming through and, trying to identify them and trying to kind of protect against them and respond to them as well. So a lot of times you'll use a SIM type of tool or another type of tool, a case management tool, to kind of direct those different operations. On the engineering side, you're much more trying to set up those tools and get them going. It's a lot more project oriented. And so that might be more of the 8 to 4, 9 to 5 type of job that's going on. But a lot of times our engineers, they're doing a lot of back end work in the terminal, in the command prompt. Sometimes you need to know a little bit of Python or Regex or some of those different coding languages or a little bit of bash scripting. But overall, you need to know how the network functions and what the architecture looks like so that you can put together a secure network and make sure that the tools are running effectively for those security operations. When we look more towards the offensive side of the house, we have penetration testing, right? Which many people think of as ethical hacking. And if you've ever watched a movie or a TV show about cybersecurity, oftentimes they're talking about pen testing. That's the big sexy thing everybody wants to do. But really, it's all about identifying vulnerabilities on a network or on a system and providing proofs of concept to the customer. So we can go to them and say, hey, we're able to get into your network. We could laterally move around. We could elevate our privileges. We do X, Y, and Z. And that allows the customer to then fix their defenses appropriately. Kind of, aligned with pen testing, you have application security or AppSec. And that, like I said, it can have an offensive angle to it as well. And that typically involves trying to get into applications or pieces of software and make them do something they're not supposed to be doing. Or it's even breaking down the code and looking for vulnerabilities within it. But it's a very expansive field. It has a defensive side that gets into threat modeling, and it covers a lot of different areas. Personally, I try to pursue or get people to pursue AppSec and consider that before looking at pen testing. But there's a lot of different jobs across all these different areas, right? And then at the bottom there, kind of overseeing all of this and kind of shadowing over the whole thing is governance, risk, and compliance. And really, we call this GRC, right? So really, this is the reason why we end up doing most of our cybersecurity services. It's either for compliance reasons that are laid out by a regulatory official, or because we are ultimately trying to reduce the customer's overall cyber risk. And so GRC professionals take a higher level view of that situation and have to be able to determine what's best for this business, right? And what is the business doing to incorporate security into their different processes. In this, they do a lot of different things. It might include auditing. I think that's what a lot of people tend to think of, but it can also be end user training. It can be going and getting very technical and looking at identity access roles. They can get pretty technical themselves. All right, I'm not going to go through all these, I promise. Like we said, it's a Friday afternoon. I'm sure some of you are antsy to go out and enjoy the beautiful weather there, but I do want to look at a couple of these entry-level roles in particular. Now, obviously, this, again, it doesn't include everything. And the required skills I've listed here, they can vary drastically depending on the company and the position. And, I think overall, though, this is a decent list of where people can start kind of focusing some of their efforts within their cyber journey. But first and foremost, I want to start with a SOC analyst. When I say SOC, I'm talking about a security operations center. So a SOC analyst, sometimes called a security analyst, cybersecurity specialist, right? Really, I think that's one of the best places to start your career. In fact, that's where a lot of people tend to start their career, especially if you don't quite know which way you want to go yet. And when we talk about large scale enterprise environments, basically everything we do is centered around that SOC analyst and what they're capable of. So having that knowledge of what occurs in the SOC, so what happens when a threat is spotted, what happens with those frontline defenders, are they working with the intel people, are they going through and dealing with the incident response piece, are they working with digital forensics? Understanding all of that kind of helps you throughout your career as you pivot out into other realms after that SOC analyst position. And really, I think overall that position sets you up so you can move into a more senior SOC analyst role, or you can get into, threat intelligence or digital forensics, or even pivot all the way into engineering. And it's just going to make you a stronger, cybersecurity professional overall. The second position I'll point out here is a junior AppSec engineer. Now, if you do want to get into the offensive side of the house, as I was talking about on the last slide here, I think this can be a much better way to go than penetration testing. Notice how pen testing is at the bottom. That's got the fewest jobs. It's one of the hardest ways to go. And there's a lot of competition, even though everyone thinks they want to end up getting into it. But AppSec can be a little easier to get into. And personally, I find it to be a lot of fun. And there's a lot of tools out there to help you learn web application testing in particular. I will say, though, if you get into AppSec, you're typically going to need some knowledge of a programming language. Unlike, most of the other positions here, you really don't. But because of that, we tend to get a lot of people that are studying computer science degrees within their universities that are looking to get into application security. And then the last last position I kind of like to talk about here is the junior identity engineer. So identity, call it IAM, IDAM, stands for identity and access management. That's a very fast growing field in itself. There's a ton of vendors that keep popping up, and nearly every organization is moving towards a zero trust architecture. As you've probably heard zero trust being thrown around, but that type of architecture is leaning pretty heavily on account management solutions. And so I think this is a really good option to go if you want to get into the defensive side, particularly looking at engineering overall. All right, how we doing with questions? Good to keep rolling?
We have one question.
Right.
It is, so when talking about apps like Palo Alto, CrowdStrike, Splunk, and the rest of them, when an individual gets a certification or something like that, how can they actually prove to you that they have some hands-on? For example, an individual has done a variety of Splunk scenarios on TryHackMe. Would that count? How would they kind of frame that?
Yeah, I think that's good if you're using resources like TryHackMe and Hack the Box and stuff like that. Really, if you're going for the entry level, I like to see projects listed, and you can say and bring it up during an interview too. Like, you can put Splunk on your resume, and you can say, hey, I've done these different things with Splunk, right? If you do put Splunk, what I prefer to see, I'd say, is download the free version of Splunk, put it on your home network, start monitoring your network, and you can throw that on GitHub. You can put that on your resume, like, hey, I created a home network underneath a project section, or even be prepared to talk about that during the interview. Because when I see stuff like that, and I think I actually have a slide that points it out, when I see that, I love that, because it means you're going out and learning on your own. And also tells me you can work through issues, because a lot of times it's not as simple as just click the download button and everything works perfectly, right? All these devices are updating all the time. So you're going to run into speed bumps along the way. And it's telling me that you have the mental agility and the drive to kind of get through and fix any sort of problems you have and work through them. I think that's, for me, that's what I'm looking for. As a, in lieu of some of that hands-on experience you might get with a company. But even if you're doing TryHackMe and stuff, I see people add in TryHackMe in their account ID or a link to their account all the time for TryHackMe and Hack the Box. So I think that's good stuff. If, again, for entry-level roles, right, you don't want to bog down your resume with too much stuff. But if you need to include, hey, I'm going out there and trying to do something, I like seeing stuff like that on a resume.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really helpful. We got two more actually while we're answering that. The first is, can a veteran do an internship, or are those reserved for students or transitioning individuals?
We have brought on veterans in the past. I will say most of our seats are for transitioning service members, but yeah, I think we actually have somebody on the call who's in our program right now who was an MP and a veteran. So short answer, yes, anyone can apply. We'll consider anyone, even if you're a veteran.
Awesome. Very helpful. And then do you have entry-level positions for somebody looking at computer forensics? If not, where do you recommend somebody start looking around if they're interested in the forensics space? Yeah,
forensics that's hard. That's a pretty difficult spot to get started with. I personally, I don't think we do here at GuidePoint Security, though we're always adding and looking for new talent. I'd say try to get in with a security operations into a SOC environment, right? Take a year and do a SOC analyst role, or look for a threat hunter role, and try to branch out, right? Because that's really how a lot of people do it. Is they start with one of those entry-level roles, they gain that experience, and then they make it quite clear that, hey, I want to get into the digital forensic side of the house. And, what's my path to do that? This is, what I'm currently doing. What else should I be doing to work that angle? I'd say forensics across the board can be pretty difficult to get into, kind of like pen testing, but there's certainly opportunities there. I would, try to remain a little flexible, look for jobs that are kind of adjacent to what you want to do. And maybe you spend a year being a SOC analyst and then look to move into one of those roles. So it'll make it a lot easier.
Gotcha. Thanks. That was really helpful.
Cool. All right, let's jump into establishing your foundation. So this is, again, something our company does. And what I like to particularly do is to break down these different technical foundations into 3 pillars. I mean, that's how I call them. You can call them whatever you want, right? But it's breaking it down into understanding networking, security, and systems. And I really do believe that anybody looking to get into cybersecurity, they need to gain some information, some knowledge and skills in these 3 areas. I think you heard Taylor talk about it when we got the, hey, do you really hire entry level? And I think her response was, well, define entry level, right? Because when I say entry level, I do kind of expect you to have these foundational pillars already built out. Maybe you don't have the working experience, right? But you've gone out and you've learned these different things and you have at least have the knowledge of it. And there's a ton of free resources or very cheap resources out there that'll help you do all these different things. And that's kind of what I want to talk about here. You don't have to go out and spend, thousands of dollars or anything. You can do a lot of this stuff for free. But if I recommend starting with networking, I think this piece is critical. I often see people just jump directly into security to get started. And, maybe that works for some people. Some people do get away with it, right? But really what I want to see is that you understand how computers can even talk to one another, right? I had the luxury of going through CCNA, thank you, Army, for doing that. And CCNA was incredible in terms of getting me up to speed on the networking terminology and all the protocols that are used in IP subnetting, which I think is kind of critical for you to understand that piece of it if you're going to be able to secure that piece of it, right? But CCNA itself, that's an expensive course. And it was 4 weeks of 8-hour days. So you do the math, that's 160 hours that you're just in, lectures, learning that material. And so that might not be realistic for you, right? Depending on your situation. So instead, I offer this up to you. Go and start studying for a certification like Network Plus. And as you go through and study for the exam, you don't have to take the certification exam, but start studying for it. And you'll be learning during that time about all these different networking angles, and you'll actually learn a ton of just how computers talk to one another. And then take that, pair it up with creating a home lab, using some virtual machines, using containerization to really mess around with different IP schemes and setting up subnets and, figure out what happens if you turn DHCP off. Just go out and explore, really. Have that natural curiosity and see how far you can take things. If you want to start a little easier than like virtual machines, there's what's called Packet Tracer. That's a free tool offered by Cisco. And that actually allows you to, just within that software, to create networks. You can go in and actually run terminal commands, and it's very accurate to what you'd see in the real world, right in that one piece of software. And it's super easy to download and get started. And they actually have training videos available too. But I'd start there, start studying for Net Plus, working through that, download Packet Tracer, mess around, and then create a home lab if you can. Again, I love seeing stuff like that on resumes. For me, that means that you're able to work through issues and then you have a genuine interest in the field. And then once you start getting comfortable with the networking side, and again, you don't have to take Network Plus, you don't have to take a certification exam. I mostly just want you to build up your knowledge in networking. But once you're comfortable there, move into the security pillar and start studying for Sec Plus. That's a certification you might want to seriously consider taking. I know it looks great on a resume. We encourage all of our student interns to go out and get that. And more recently, ISC Squared, which they're a great organization in themselves, they released Certified in Cybersecurity, CC for short. I haven't taken it, so full disclosure, I don't know fully what it's about, but I've heard good things about it, and they're offering a free voucher for the CC exam right now for the first 1 million people because they're just trying to get it out into industry. But work towards one of those entry-level cybersecurity certifications. And in doing so, you're going to download some different tools, right? I got Wireshark. I know I spoke a little badly about them earlier, but that's a great tool for learning how to train. And you'll get into Burp Suite and we can look at Canary Tokens, the Vulnerable Web app, bunch of different tools that you can download. But really, you just need to start looking at some of that entry level knowledge that you need so you can speak the language when you go into an interview. And if I say a VPN or a firewall or an IDS, you know what I'm talking about, right? And as you're approaching kind of that, the end of your security foundation, start looking into operating systems, which you'll likely gain exposure to them as you're going through networking and security. And really what I mean here is learn Linux if you haven't used it before. Linux is nearly everywhere on the security front. So you should get comfortable in a Linux terminal, especially if you want to get into the engineering side of things. If you're looking to be an analyst, then, you might not need to know the terminal in reality, right? But at least know the differences between Windows and Linux, particularly in terms of how you defend them and the different files involved when we talk security implications, right? So where are the accounts stored? Where are the passwords stored? How are those normally secured overall? And you should be able to recognize the difference in directory structure between Linux and Windows. And Linux is entirely free. You just need a VM. You can download. There's dozens of different flavors of Linux out there. Download it and make sure you've at least been exposed to it. From a Windows standpoint, there's what's called Microsoft Learn. They have their whole training platform there, a ton of free training available through Microsoft Learn. So go out there and learn PowerShell, learn the command prompt, learn about sysinternals, or even just Windows Defender. How does Windows Defender work? What does it look for? What does it stop, right? Those are all, really good things to know about the native security features of those different operating systems. And again, I think a lot of people kind of dismiss that, and they really only focus on the security pillar when they're going for an entry-level job. All right, I know I just threw a ton at you. Hopefully you caught most of it. If you didn't catch it all, that's okay, right? I believe we're putting in some links too into the chat, and links out to the blog I have about creating training plans and some of these different resources and how you can go about getting them. But in general, what I want you to take away here is to create that foundation of knowledge that you can build upon. And personally, I find it helpful to create a training plan. We do it with all of our DoD fellows and all of our student interns and basically all of our entry-level new hires that are coming in. We make sure they have a training plan in place. And you can find training plans online that are free. You can pay to have someone create a training plan for you, but I really don't think that's necessary. At least I wouldn't hand out big bucks for it, that's for sure. Really, I think the best way to create a training plan is sit down and make it yourself, and make sure it meets, with what your schedule is. So really, there's a couple of reasons I want you to make a training plan if you're going to go this route and you're looking for entry-level hire. Or even if you're trying to get into one of those more specialized fields. We have people that come out of the military after 10 years in cyber operations, and we need to specialize them, right? Take them from a generalist into a specialty. So we might have a 6-month plan that makes them into a Splunk consultant, or makes them into a senior penetration tester, right? But overall, you need to have a plan that fits your schedule. And I think it helps you with talking to hiring managers, right? So if you go into an interview, especially an entry-level one, you can go in and say, hey, I know I don't have a ton of experience in this area, but this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing to address my shortcomings, right? And that's something you talk about with weaknesses and, hey, I'm looking to improve in these different areas and I'm trying to get the hands-on application. And I think that goes a long way when you talk to hiring managers. And I know this is, that's something we teach our interns to do when they're talking to hiring managers, is be upfront and address your weaknesses right then and there. Hey, I don't have a ton of experience, but this is what I'm doing to try and fix that. The other reason is if you make a training plan and it doesn't work out at first, of course you can massage it based on your schedule. You might have to change it a few times, but if you find that you just can't keep up with the training plan you've created, or you're really struggling to get motivated to go out and learn new skills and techniques that are, on that calendar for that day, this might not be the right career for you, unfortunately. None of these jobs, like I said, getting into an entry-level job, it's not easy. It's not going to be handed to you. And there's a lot of drive and personal development that goes into this field. all of our engineers and consultants, they're out there all the time personally developing themselves because they have to stay up to date on the newest techniques, the newest threats, the newest tools that are out there. Otherwise, we just fall way behind the threat. So this is definitely not an industry where you can just kind of coast for your entire career. But all right, when it comes to making those training plans too, I kind of want to get into the cyber certifications, because one nice way to design your training plan is to work around these certifications. I mentioned this a little earlier with the building your foundational knowledge, but a lot of this stuff, that security stuff, that networking stuff, that's covered in certifications. So you can actually sit down and say, hey, I want to take CompTIA's Sec Plus in 4 weeks, and just look at that exam blueprint. And that's basically your training plan right there. Now I'm going to study, 1 through 3 topics on this day. And then, the next day, 4 through 5, and so on. And it's going to list out all those different areas and basically does the job for you. But what I do want to say too, when we look at industry certifications, is that it's important to pick the correct ones for what you're looking to do. Since these do cost money, they do take time, right? You don't want to be wasting your time or money. Nobody wants to do that, right? And that reminds me too, anyone still in the military, you can request certification vouchers through the COOL program. That's at least for Army and Air Force. I'm not sure about the Navy, Marines, and Coast Guard, but I'd say look for it, COOL, COOL, just Google for it. And also Syracuse University offers a lot of free vouchers for certifications for at least current service members. I'm not sure about veterans. They might as well for veterans, but take a look if you want to get some of these certs paid for. But anyway, what I want to make clear is 2 different types of certifications, right? You got your vendor agnostic and your vendor specific. And if you're just getting started in the field, I highly recommend you start with a vendor agnostic certification, because these are going to be recognized by nearly any organization, and they're really going to help your resume compared to others. And so these certs are, they're so important that the government has actually created regulations to dictate which certifications you need in order to obtain certain federal positions. So if you're looking to do cybersecurity on the federal side, which a lot of military find that a little bit easier of a path, you should become familiar with DoD 8570, which lists out, hey, these are different levels that you need, the different certifications you need to attain these different levels of IAT, which directly get matched up to some of the job opportunities within the field. Now, on the other hand, if you've been in the field for a little bit, or you've been in IT, or you have, a very good idea of what specialty you want to get into, you can start looking at vendor specific and take a more targeted approach to your training and your preparation for the civilian industry. That being said, I'd be very careful with some of these certs. You're going to want to focus on big name vendors that will be widely recognized by potential employers. So you don't want to go out and get a small vendor that's just hasn't made a name for itself yet. You want to get these certifications that are applicable to as many organizations as possible. And I will say that if you get a vendor specific cert, and that the organization you're applying for actually uses that vendor tool, you're going to become very marketable to that vendor. So it's really going to give you a leg up. And so this becomes a very, targeted approach if you want to take the vendor specific way. But overall, if you're just getting started, or if you're in doubt on which certifications to go through, start with the vendor agnostic one. In particular, go for Sec Plus. If, again, if you don't know where to get started, that's pretty much just standard for entry-level security roles that we look for, and I think kind of across the board in the industry. And I will say, when it comes to studying for these certs, most of the vendor certifications have free training available to them. Just go to their website, honestly, and look through. It's typically under resources. They want to train you up on these tools because they want you to go out and use them and get more people using them. It's free marketing for them. On the vendor agnostic side, you can often get a class on Udemy for $20, or get a $15 book on Amazon if you're good at reading for tests. But if you're going for any of the CompTIA certifications, check out Professor Messer. He's done a ton of work and stays up to date, and he's really broken down all the different areas on those tests and does individual bite-sized training for a lot of those different areas on the exam. All right. All right. Before moving to industry tools, how are we doing question wise?
Okay, let's see.
I don't have anything new on my board.
Good to go. We got a thank you though, so that's nice. Much appreciated. But Kevin,
Yeah, I like it. All right, nice. Yeah, so you probably heard some of these tools that you see here. I kind of break them down to operational engineering, offensive, and these are all a mix of proprietary tools and open source tools. But the one thing they all have in common is that all of them are either free to download or they have a free version you can use. And if you remember when we talked about barriers to entry, I mentioned that a lot of times candidates don't have that hands-on experience with industry vendor tools, right? And so now it's actually kind of funny. A lot of these offensive tools are entirely free. Some of them come pre-installed in Kali Linux, but there are obviously professional versions of like Metasploit, Burp Suite that you'll see used in industry. But you can still get familiar with these tools, even if they are the free versions, because a lot of them use a lot of the same features. And if you're good with the free version, you're only going to be better with the professional version. And the one thing I will say, if you go on the offensive side, the one tool you absolutely must know, it's actually an operating system, but it's Kali Linux. If you walk into an interview for a pen testing position and you do not know what Kali is, you're going to get laughed out of the room. But anyways, going back to the defensive side, the ops and the engineering, some of the most popular tools, I've kind of listed some of them here that are free to download. I would say if you don't know where to start with some of these tools, start with the SIM platform. That is one of the most popular tools you're going to see in the industry. So if you're unsure where to start with a SIM. On the engineering front, you probably want to know a lot of the ops tools, but it's just using them a little differently. If you can install them, get them up and running, that's more of what an engineer does compared to the ops side. And if you're wondering where to get started on the engineering front, I'd start with a SIM as well, but you can also look at Security Onion. That's a whole suite of tools in a system itself. And it's a really good way to get exposure to several different tools, and it's all part of one download. So what I'm getting at here too is overall, you don't want to just learn these tools in the sense that you watched a video on them. You want to download them and start to use them, even if it's just on your home network and you start attacking your home network, right? And some of the ways you can, when we talk about a home network, some of the ways you can set that up is through virtualization or containerization. And, if that doesn't work, you can always set up a free tier account on some of these cloud providers like AWS and Azure. But basically, what you want to do is you want to create an environment for yourself, set up that home network, and be able to talk about it. And you can create different virtual machines, right? And mess around without having to worry about exposing yourself or breaking anything. Because if you break something, you can just start over. Personally, I like the local virtualization, but that does require some computing resources on your end. So if you have a problem with computing resources or with virtualization, you can always sign up for the free tier account on AWS and start spinning up machines and get them talking to one another. And now, so one of the things I often get a lot of my interns started with this scenario in particular, but once you get your tools installed, you got your virtual machines up and going, I'd like to just create a scenario for myself, right? This is one of my go-tos, like I was saying. So I'll tell an intern, hey, set up 3 different devices, get one device that has Kali Linux on it, get one device that has a vulnerable web application on it, and then get some sort of SIM tool to monitor that vulnerable device. And I'll say, set those up. That's some of the engineering part, right? And start attacking that vulnerable web app from that Kali box and see if you can catch it in your SIM, see if you can monitor, right? And actually see what's happening. And so I really like this scenario in particular. Take a screenshot if you want to, and try setting it up on your own. But I like this because it covers all those different pillars, right? And again, it allows you to speak in an interview. Hey, you just haven't looked at Splunk before, but you've actually, seen how, an SQL injection attack has occurred, or you've created an alert, you've created a dashboard, right? You can expand on this one particular scenario in so many different ways, and it covers all those 3 foundational pillars, right? Plus, Again, it's all free to set this up and do all this through virtualization. But all right, that's kind of it from tool standpoints. I did have one last section here about standing out from the crowd. We good with questions? That was a little quick, so.
Okay. Would it be possible to have a copy of that slide deck is one?
Yeah, I'm sure we can, Peter, I can send you like a PDF version if you want to distro that somehow.
Yeah, I can figure that out.
Okay.
Also, I'll put it in the follow-up email to the attendees with the recording. The next is, for those who want to enter cybersecurity and end up in GRC with the potential to audit, what would be the top 3 agnostic certifications to get? Or maybe what would be, 1 or 2 good ones to get?
Yeah, again, I think you can start off with Sec Plus. That's kind of across the board. It's going to teach you the language and a lot of the common terminology we use, right? Ultimately, what I think you're going to want to get towards is a CISSP, SSP, and that's by ISC squared. Typically, they don't give that out unless you have, and you can verify that you have at least 5 years working in the industry. But ultimately, that's probably the goal. You're going to want to establish that before you even call yourself a GRC professional. So it's CISSP, CISSP.
Gotcha. Awesome. That's super helpful. We'll go ahead and move forward.
All right. Yeah. So final section here. It's just, standing out from the crowd, getting that job, right? And I think, our recruiters and Lori kind of talked about a lot of this stuff already, but you need to find ways to stand out. And so you want to stand out on your resume. You want to stand out through means outside of your resume, and then also, stand out in the interview itself. All right. So let's start by looking at the crowd, right? Who are you trying to even stand out against? So this is kind of giving you a little bit of a look in at behind the scenes, what's going on. So as we've mentioned several times in the beginning, we did open up a summer internship job posting, and it was up for less than 2 months. And these are some of the applications and resumes that we actually got. And what I'm getting at here is these all look pretty similar, right? And that's pretty typical when we open up an application, is that we see resumes that are all very close to one another. And so when you look at them, not a ton sticks out differently, right? And unfortunately, that's often the case. And then you kind of multiply that, and eventually we end up with 580 different applications that occurred that we got just for our summer internship posting. That was in less than 2 months, right? And so that's a lot of resumes to go through. And I want you to understand that the recruiters, maybe they're spending 20 seconds on each one before they make a decision. And you know what, that might be very unfortunate, but ultimately that's kind of the way it's been driven now. And so you need to find a way to stand out from the crowd, right? And so how we can kind of do that, again, I know Lori provided really good insights there, and the recruiter spoke a lot about this, so I won't spend too much time on it here, but things that I like to look for, first, list out your certifications. That's, one definite way to show that you are working towards getting better in the field and that you have a drive to succeed in the industry. Even if you don't have a cert, right? Kind of like your education, it's okay to say you're working towards one. We see that quite a bit often for a lot of our interns that are applying. And I will say there's one big caveat with that, though. Do not say you're working towards a certification if you haven't started it yet. Whenever I see that in progress, I'm going to ask questions about it. Ask how you're studying. I might ask you an actual Sec Plus question if I see that. So don't throw it on there if you haven't started prepping or if you cannot speak to it. Second thing I like to look for is showcasing your knowledge of industry tools. Kind of address that with the question I was asked earlier. I like seeing the skills. You can add in a project section if you want to, but again, those popular industry tools, they're going to be big names that you see within the industry. So go out there, and when we talk about buzzwords, that's usually what we're talking about in cybersecurity, is we're looking for those vendor tools and seeing if you have knowledge of them. And once again, can't stress it enough, don't include those items unless you can speak to them, because chances are we're going to ask you about them. All right. The third thing here that I have is I love to see when people are getting involved in the industry overall. So for me, that shows a genuine interest in cybersecurity. It also tells me that you can interact with others, and you're going out there on your own and trying to get better. And you'll see I have circled here Dean's List. And honestly, that's fine, right? It's nice to know this person does well in school, and certainly nothing wrong with adding in Dean's List. In fact, you should put that on your resume. But what I really care about here is seeing the involvement in Cybersecurity Club and seeing the involvement in Women in Computing. Because again, it's telling me they're going out there in industry and getting involved. And I think, my big red block there was covered too, but don't do any of those silly, crazy mistakes. That's only going to immediately excuse yourself from consideration. And, when we talked about the ATS earlier too, try to submit your resume as a PDF, not a Word doc. A lot of those HR systems convert the Word docs to an image, so your resume can really look funny if you do that. That's been my personal experience. I'm sure the recruiters have used way more than I have, though. All right. So outside of your resume, and I think this is probably the most important thing, is just, find a way to build your brand. Get on LinkedIn if you haven't already. That's been mentioned multiple times. And find a way to get your name recognized by the recruiters, by the hiring manager, because we're just human, right? If I have 580 resumes, it's really hard to look through all those and really pay attention to all those in depth. But if I see a name I recognize, I'm going to give you some serious consideration for that application. And so, communicate, first and foremost, use your recruiters as a liaison. But if you meet other people in the company, if you go to those different company events that are being hosted, like our company does GPSec in all the major cities across the country, and a lot of these big name companies, they end up doing that themselves too. And so it's a great way to go out there, connect and network. And there's even, you might be thinking too, like these conferences that cost a lot of money, and yeah, some of them do, like Black Hat and RSA might cost a lot, but SANS has a bunch of free summits that they offer virtually and in person, and B-Sides is usually quite affordable too. And you should go and just network and meet people, and you never know what might come of that. And it might just say, hey, I've been looking to get into the industry, right? Don't dwell on it, but you can bring it up that you've been, looking for a different role or opportunity within cybersecurity itself. And then finally, I have stand out in the interview, and I think a lot of this has been covered, right? Do your research, go to that company website, check the news, see if there's anything that's been in the news lately. When I was job hunting, I like to look at Glassdoor. I thought that provided pretty good insight into overall the state of the company. And if you can talk to a hiring manager, if I have someone that comes in, yeah, I love hearing about the core values, like Taylor said. I like, though, hearing too, if we have something in the news or something big happened to us that we just, somebody mentioned that they saw that we just hit $1 billion in revenue for the first time back last October. That's awesome. It tells me you did your research, and that you're actually invested in what we're doing as a company. The other thing is that I like to ask about industry events, like current events that are going on. I think a lot of hiring managers do too, because again, it just shows that genuine interest. So get out there, for better or for worse. Social media actually has a lot of the information of what's happening in the cybersecurity field. Get on Twitter, hop on Reddit and start to see what's actually going on in cybersecurity, and be prepared to discuss that in an interview. I also like to, follow a couple blogs. I like Krebs on Security by Brian Krebs. He's a good person to follow. So, find some of those industry leaders and see what they're saying, stay up to date on those news, and bring it up during an interview. I'm always impressed when somebody does bring up a current event and they want to talk about it, and that just gets a conversation going, and it makes me feel a lot better about them, that they have a genuine interest in the industry. We talked about knowing what you want to do, understanding the roles, right? And be prepared to discuss your career overall and where you want to take it. And then finally, it is okay if you don't know something. I know some hiring managers that'll actually go out of their way to ask very tricky questions to see if you provide a wrong answer. And in reality, a wrong answer is much worse than no answer at all in our industry. That all comes back to what we do in this field, right? Security professionals need to be able to identify when they don't know something so that they can turn to help, instead of implementing a poorly designed solution that could ultimately cause major damages. Plus, the field cybersecurity itself, it's huge, right? No one expects you to know everything. So it's okay if you say, hey, I don't know, I'd love to hear more, or, I'm looking into that, or hey, I'll go research it, right, and get back to you. That's perfectly okay. And if they expect you to know everything and you don't, and then you probably don't want to work for them, honestly, if they do expect you to know everything. But I think overall across this field, we've come to grasp that it is vast, right? And we're not going to know everything that we're doing. So asking for help is huge. And this all kind of boils down in the interview stage to be able to admit when you don't know something. But yeah, that brings me kind of through everything I wanted to say today. We got some closing thoughts here, and then we'll open it up if there are any further questions. But overall, if you're looking to get into an entry-level role in particular, be flexible. Be willing to take like a night shift. I know it might suck at first, but it can be temporary, right? Be willing to either move or to drive a little further. If you are looking for anything classified, like classified TSSCI level work in cybersecurity, the DC area is probably the best place for you. But that's going to really limit yourself if you're not willing to relocate for some of that classified work. Obviously, there's a ton of remote work available, and so location doesn't matter as much there. And then finally, pay, right? Even if you were in the military, and this was hard for me. If you've been in the military for 12 years or whatever it happens to be, you might think that that's 12 years experience. But if you're getting into cybersecurity, that's not 12 years that directly translates, right? Unfortunately, you do have a lot of experience in the working world, a lot of skills that translate over very well. And we love bringing in military because we know that they have the discipline, and that they have attention to detail, right? And that they can follow through on task. But instead of 12 years experience, maybe that equates to 6 years experience in the cybersecurity field. And so you might have to be flexible and pay. And that gets into researching, right? And I think Mike mentioned this, but we have a real issue across the board in industry where everybody says they're making 350K with 0 years experience. And that's not the truth, right? You can go onto websites and say, I saw one the other day. It said the average person with AWS Cloud Practitioner certification makes over $200,000. And maybe that's true if that includes like Bill Gates in there, right? That's an average of people that have, 30 plus years experience included. The average person doesn't get an AWS Cloud Practitioner and then makes $200,000, right? So you got to be realistic with your expectations. The other thing is that, one thing our company does, and we're starting to see a lot of other companies do too, is internships, fellowships, apprenticeships, really find alternate ways to get employed and to just get your foot in the door, gain some of that experience, right? And then, overall, pick a specialty, focus in what you want to do, be able to talk to that, and then differentiate yourself. Like I said, find a way to stand out amongst the crowd. But that's all I got for today. If you want more information, you can go to our website. You can email us. If you want to apply for one of our DoD fellowships, you can go to our careers page as well. But that's all I got for you today. Were there any final questions that came through?
Yeah, we've got one more. Before that, Kevin, I just want to say thank you, not only for coming on, but for helping us set up this event, for helping get 3 of the great GuidePoint recruiters that came on today, for giving us the Sec Plus vouchers, for supporting Boots to Books for so long. I really appreciate it, and I couldn't think of somebody we'd want to work with more. It's been a real joy, so I want to take a second to say that. Thank you. And then the question, for those with the CISSP, how valuable is a SANS or GIAC, maybe, who knows, certification? As you can tell, I'm not a cyber professional either. Are these courses worth the expensive fees?
I'd say no. They're very, very good courses, right? If you got the cash to pay for them, yeah, you can do it. Personally, we kind of, honestly, when I'm looking at a resume and I see CISP and then a bunch of SANS courses or certs following it, I don't know if I really give it all that much value. It's cool to see. But at that price tag, I personally I don't think it's worth the investment. Some people differ. If you get into pen testing or forensics, something extremely specialized and challenging to get into, and you can get a SANS course in that particular area, yeah, I'd say go for it. But in general, I really don't think they're all that necessary. They're very expensive.
Got it. Awesome. Super helpful. That was our last question. So I'm going to go ahead and move into the giveaway. It'll be pretty quick. I'm going to go ahead and drop this in the chat while I talk, but here's what you do. So if you're interested in one of the 3 Security Plus vouchers so generously donated to us by GuidePoint, all you're going to do is you're going to send an email to info@boots2books.com. You're going to tell us a tiny bit about how the voucher would benefit your journey and a link to your LinkedIn. That's all it takes. So I'll give it a second here while I let that information sit in the chat. Let everybody grab that. Please copy and paste it so you can enter to get your free certification. But while we're here, I think a couple of the things that were touched on that are really important are worth reiterating, and that'll give everybody a chance to grab that from the chat. So once again, if you want to enter the giveaway, open the chat right now, email info@boots2books.com. But to close it out, first, thanks everybody so much for coming. It was a real joy to have you, and we really love having these events, seeing the community come out, and especially getting your questions, because I think that really helps guide the events to a productive place and also to what you guys want to hear. But a few things that I thought were really important are, first, cyber is a really broad industry, right? And if you don't know your target within that industry, it's going to be really hard to hit it. And so doing that research of looking, like Kevin laid out, right? There's the offensive and the defensive side. There's all of these kind of subcategories. There's GRC is this kind of overarching thing. And it's confusing. It definitely is, but it takes research and it takes you reaching out to individuals like Kevin or individuals in the industry to actually learn about it and think what it is that you truly want to do within cyber. And then once you get there, there's a lot of things you're going to have to do to upskill, right? Just because you have this experience from the military doesn't mean that that perfectly translates to being, let's say a SOC analyst. And so using those free resources that are available, namely those big name providers that Kevin was talking about, is going to give you the opportunity to build your skills, whether it be just on your own at home alone, an internship, fellowship, whatever it be, but it gives you that chance to build out your experience without needing an employer, so that come that application interview, you actually have something to speak to. But I think this was really helpful. Kevin, thank you again so much for this. For all who attended, make sure that you apply, or I guess enter for that giveaway. I'll put it in the chat one more time before I hop off. Make sure to follow GuidePoint Security on LinkedIn, go connect with Kevin, and thank you all so much for coming. The recording, as well as the slides, will be emailed out to everyone on Monday, and the winners of the giveaway will be notified then as well. Have a great weekend.